We want the audience to come with an open mind, ready for something completely new.
This is the most intimate setting we could create to showcase our album exactly as we intended.
It's the kind of show that will take everyone by surprise.
We have been conceptualizing and putting together a 3D, 360-degree binaural headphone concert, which is a mouthful, so we call it Immersion. And it's essentially a headphone concert that brings in new technology to create a very immersive sound mix, so you can place audio in full 360-degree spectrum.
A typical headphone show would just be a mix through microphones and the band and everything, and then instead of like your outputs going to speakers, then it would go to headphones. With binaural audio, you can treat the audio so it sounds like it's coming from all around your head. So I could play something like 50 feet this way and down and off axis.
What's unique and impressive about this project is that we're processing live instruments in real time. So it's not premeditated in the same sense that it's like curated and planned. This is taking something that is happening in real time, processing it in under 10 milliseconds so you can't hear any latency, and then giving it to the audience. So all this to say, it's putting the audience in the center of the music and allowing the music to really engulf them. Kellen and I were in the front seat of our band van driving home from Toronto. We were talking about wanting to do something unique to promote the new record. So we sort of dreamt up this idea of like, oh, what if we do like a listening party? We sit them down, we give them headphones, and we click play on the record. And that was like, oh, that could be cool. Like we can invite our friends out. It would probably be pretty cozy. And then we thought, wait, why don't we play our new record live and do the same thing with headphones? Out of a desire to do something different, we then pursued the 3D idea, which for a long time was just a theory. The deeper we researched, and by the time we got in contact with the right people, we're like, whoa, this can actually happen. We should go for it.
Immersion is us trying to create an experience for the audience that's different from anything they've experienced before. I feel like with this record, it was more about just like creating the perfect atmosphere where people can just be with our record and experience it in their own way.
You can go to a concert and have a very similar experience that you might have had the week before. So I think our goal is to challenge that and try something new.
It's been like a year and a half of just literally every day we talk about this tour and this show and like how we're gonna make it work, and everything from getting the headphones to the audience to like planning out the 3D mapping to sending Kellen, our sound tech, to Montreal to learn the 3D audio. There was such an amplified stress to every aspect of this project.
You got your guitar on right now, so let's do your guitar, Will.
Chris's snare up.
We've never played these songs before. I feel like we've hyped up this show a lot in our own heads, which I think is fair. Like, it's gonna be sweet, but it's just, there's a bajillion things that are making it sweet, and all those bajillion things need to line up just flawlessly. So, you know, it'll be. What could go wrong? You know, this is 100,000.
The hour before, it was kind of just like an anxious feeling of like, okay, this is happening. Okay, what's gonna happen? Is it something gonna go wrong? Is it gonna go right? Are we gonna play good? Are we gonna screw up the songs? Just all of these questions that we've been thinking about are just flying through my head. I don't think I've felt that nervous in a show ever.
We got up there, and as soon as I started playing, I was just shaking.
This was easily the most nervous I've ever been for a show. And like even menial things I've done 10,000 times were infinitely harder. Like when I first got up and I was like putting on my guitar and like doing the cool rock thing where you go through your strap and then in, so you don't, if you step on it, your cable doesn't go out. Even that felt like a mountain I couldn't climb. Like I was so scared and like not in a healthy headspace to start playing vulnerable music that's near and dear to my heart.
Love you, boys. Love you, boys. Let's try it. Let's have some fun. Yeah, so we've come this far. Let's just look at the sun. Let's roll some lines.
I looked out and I could feel a lot of affirmation that like, oh my goodness, the thing we've been working on for 18 months is working. So it was like half excitement, half relief, to be quite honest.
I think it was when I saw people closing their eyes, because you see that sometimes in a bar show, but when like half the people in the audience just like have their eyes closed and are kind of just getting lost in the music, it's like, okay, this is connecting with people, you know?
To be honest, going in, I was thinking things like small things when you're kind of like, oh, I wonder if the lights outside will be distracting because the lights are still on, or I wonder if like the headphones will become annoying after a while. But honestly, as soon as they started playing, it just kind of like all faded away, and they just transport you to a whole other place.
Oh, it was crazy. It was an awesome way to watch a show.
For me, it was like the most realistic to playing in a band, like being on stage. It kind of felt like that.
Or listening at home, like listening to the album, but it being played live right to you. So
they talked about wanting to like give people the experience of music, and when music moves you, you kind of like get shivers, or you like share that moment. And I felt like that happened tonight.
Those last two songs, I honestly had tears in my eyes. I didn't want it to end. It was so good.
This was a project that we put a lot of time and a lot of heart into to create something special. So the fact that it worked out the way we were hoping it would, that makes all of the hours that went into creating this so much more worthwhile. I don't think that's an opportunity people can get all the time, to be able to chase something like this.
It's been amazing to experience us following through with this. Somebody could have been like, you know what, I don't know if it's worth the hassle. Nobody ever said that. Everybody has always been very excited and like willing to push the boundaries and work together to try and make this thing happen.
It would have been easier to have just left an idea that we dreamt up in the van or the thought that like, man, some band should do this someday. And it's pretty cool to reflect and look back and be like, whoa, like we're that band.
Thank you.
Akegera is a trio with an original instrumentation, so trombone, drums, vibraphone and marimba. A trio without a bass. As far as we know, in this regard, it's unique. Here we're lucky enough to have this opportunity to do this first creative residency and to work in collaboration with the sound engineers and all the Flux team. We're here with them. They're in the process of evolving their equipment whilst we evolve the way we play. It's a real interaction. The meeting between Akegera, Flux and Spat will create a starting point, and perhaps we'll be the first, but I hope that people soon realise that it's easy. And in a modest fashion, we will have been at the origin of something that could perhaps become universal. The difficulty for Akegera is to create a show around their album, which was created as a trio, and to try to project into the future, to say to ourselves, how are we going to be able to use this technology? This is jazz, therefore we don't have a production with a fabulous touring rig where we can impose a technical solution, but rather the opposite, where we must adapt to the different circumstances. And so it's here that our programme, the Spat Revolution, is really welcome because it's capable of adapting to everything. So we began by bringing our expertise with regards to questions such as, what is immersion when using speakers? How can we set it up with relative ease? And then finally, how can we play with it? It's necessary to keep up with the project from the word go. Perhaps tomorrow there'll be other things. There'll certainly be other things. Even more ambitious projects perhaps. But to begin with, the idea was to see how this can work. How can we begin? So we weren't going to take out a profusion of speakers in such a small venue. We needed something more adapted to accompany them. But once again, it's about doing something viable. Already in doing nothing more than relatively simple things, we realise that it demands a great deal of effort and equipment and a lot of setting up and so on. My role during this residency was to establish the design brief in order to render this project feasible. The principal idea of this project was to conceive an installation that was lightweight, both in terms of cost and equipment, and that it be easily transportable in the context of a tour. I like to consider this system in two parts. First, there's the part of the mixing desk where we retrieve and treat the onstage sources before sending them to the Spat Revolution, and then finally in Spat we decide on the disposition of the sound and the general orientation of the aesthetics, as well as the choice of colours that we wish to apply. My role was more one of technical support, behind the mixing desk a little, on the Spat, as well as on the Lima interface, which enables one to control the Spat over distances from an iPad. So on the Lima, we worked in pairs with Gail. Him developing new things on the Spat Revolution, while I applied what he was developing directly onto the Lima interface. So this was for Victor, enabling him to simplify his workload when using Spat, as having an additional tactile interface makes an enormous difference from, say, having just a mouse, whilst adapting to his needs, if he wants bigger buttons, different functions, etc. There were many ideas that came from both the sound engineers and the Flux team that over the next few weeks and months will be further developed. These will enable live engineers to be a lot more efficient and to have a much more complete interface. What was really interesting about this project was the fact that we ourselves are in the process of constructing the tools. So we get attached to seeing how the sound engineer must adapt in order to follow the musicians, and vice versa as we put the tools in place. So we're there on the sidelines, adding functions, testing. It's great.
Hello everyone, you should actually be hearing me. Most probably, are you actually hearing me? Yes? Actually, it is working. Sorry guys, I was just wondering, I was not sure audio was coming. Welcome everyone to the Flux Immersive channel. Today, Wednesday, second day we're delivering this training. Actually, better for me today because it's not an 8 o'clock a.m. call here in Montreal, live where I am broadcasting with you guys. Actually, great, great to have so many people here online right now joining us for this training. As I was saying, we did a similar or exact same version yesterday. And we've got a lot of things to talk about today. Exciting times to be delivering this training live here, as I was saying. People from all over are actually joining us today. We obviously have a great community in France. Je vais prendre le temps 2 minutes de dire bonjour à nos amis en France, au Québec aussi, à Montréal. I just took 2 seconds to say hello to our friends here in Montreal that are actually listening to us on the broadcast. In France as well. Part of France mean as well, we have our support team that's actually are sitting right there on the chat that will be answering your questions live. So as questions come up, in the training, feel free to jump on the chat. We've got all these guys. Let's have a look. Yeah, we actually can see their face. We have Jean-Loup that's there from our team. You may have seen him from the little video introduction. We've got Francis Vincent, who's in charge of our support team, is actually online. Well, even Gael is showing up for a second. Our lead developer on this. You may actually see our friend Nicolas pop up at one point, and Felix. So these guys are all online right now. We'll be answering your questions as they come up. And what we're going to be doing is at the end of each of the modules, we've got 4 modules. Actually, we're probably going to get to cover 3 modules deeply today. We'll have a period for questions. I'm going to bring some questions live to the conversation. Anyway, but people from all over coming. We've got some people from Toronto. Hello, Toronto. Live from Montreal here, but Boston, Munich, San Francisco. We've got the West Coast guys joining us today as well. It was a bit early for the call yesterday. But and we've got some people all the way from Munich, so probably a bunch of people in Europe as well. So anyway, great to have you, and let's jump on this intense session. I say intense session because we have 2 hours of content. Quite a bit to talk about, about the Flux Immersive software. Let's actually jump and talk about the objective that we've got for today. My friend Guy here in the studio with me, that's actually going to be working on, sending you some live feeds as we go through. Thanks to Guy and Spat Studio, actually our neighbors, right where we are in Montreal, that's helping us deliver. Hello, yeah, he says hello. Good stuff. Okay, so let's bring up that PowerPoint for 1 second on the screen, please. Indeed. Okay, so yeah, quick story. My name is Hugo Laren. I'm with the Flux Immersive Group. You're listening to the Flux channel for this Spat introduction training. And we've got quite some objective to talk about today. We're going to be actually bringing you, in the subject of object-based mixing, exactly what Spat is all about, and we'll talk about spatialization techniques, various spatialization techniques, We'll talk about panning types, and we'll rapidly start to look as well at, use case stories, examples of where Spat can be deployed, being for the live entertainment, being for installations, but for production workflow, being music production, even for content and stereo for that matter of fact. We like to talk about, how this environment redefines the way, we've been mixing. Meaning, well, instead of pushing some faders and panning, to left or right, basically looking at these objects, these tracks as objects in the space. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about the acoustic simulation of Spat as well. Anyway, and we're going to get deeper into configuring the software, using it, the various things that can be done. We're going to be touching many different markets and industry today. We'll get into the live. We'll get, try actually to cover as much as possible. As I said, feel free to ask some questions as they pop up. I see the team are already busy here online, probably answering some questions. So let's talk about these 4 modules. We'll start with an introduction, kind of bring you, tell you where we're coming from with all this, with Spat Revolution software. We'll talk about, we'll actually explore the software and the capabilities with these rooms, these acoustic spaces. We're actually going to be looking at the source, the objects and their properties, panning methods, spatialization techniques, and then we'll go right in the 3rd module for deploying Spat, configuring it, and then we'll see if we get some chances to get to do a lot of integration third party. From the experience yesterday, it was tough to get in that section anyway, and they become very much market specific anyway. So whatever. We'll go and we'll see how things go for today. So the introduction, let's start to talk about this briefly. Immersive audio and, moving to object-based. And what we mean by this, and you have heard the subject before, but that's basically us, having our sources or audio sources, and it can be a single source or a bus, a stem, becoming an object in the space. And this is what, we mean by this environment. And so we're going to be talking about, this and how, Spat is actually a toolbox that has an open, design concept to actually create these environments, these spaces. And we'll go right there into the live examples, the production examples. We'll look at various, examples, use case stories. So what does Immersive do? The famous question, and I love to talk about this one. There's so many words out there, talk about immersive, talk about spatial audio, 3D audio, and everything now what, 8D? I've been hearing about this 8D, concept where, strategy to move a stereo source, processing it, spinning it around the head. Very interesting, obviously, but people basically, at the end of the day, we are here to try to immerse our audience. Being an audience on headphone, being an audience in a concert, we're basically there to try, to make them feel something. What you hear is what you feel. The concept of localizing things. The guys in the cinema industry, have been used to this with, the various format there, localizing sources, elements, attaching it to the visual, and that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to do for live concerts as well, with these frontal system deployments, where basically, what you're basically doing is you're localizing. And there's a lot of advantages as well from a sonic perspective anyway. But at the end of the day, we're moving from stereo to multiple channel, which allows us to do many things. You could even say that it allows us to distribute the signal more. In a live concert, for example, instead of being, you're not attacking as loud as you used to with the two big amps where you're distributing. So anyway, various points that can bring some advantages to this immersive concept. So object-based mixing, what basically we mean there is just basically redefining the way we've been mixing. I've covered it briefly, right? Moving from an actual track, audio track, and a panner and aux sends and stuff to actually create a mix. Now you're actually basically going to be looking at a space. You're looking at a space and positioning object in that space. So that's what it is. Our objects are moving into the space. They can be automated. It means obviously we can localize and we can follow things, being follow on the screen, follow live, right? And it can be applied to any mix format. Some people like the object-based mixing is specific to Atmos, for example, or some environment. The truth of the matter is object-based mixing or source-based mixing, call it whatever you want, at the end of the day, is you're replacing this track by a bubble in the space. And the way we actually like to talk about it is this canvas, this open space where you put object sources is, is not specific to any format. And we'll talk about this. Okay, moving along, Spat Revolution. And what Spat Revolution is? Well, Spat Revolution is an object-based mixing standalone software, a main application, and it is as well a suite of three products, three plugins that actually brings the integration. We call it a production suite, really. So the main application, three plugins that bring some integration to digital audio workstation or to some show controllers, for that matter of fact. And that's what's at the base of Spat Revolution. The history behind this is actually part of an amazing relationship with the IRCAM Research Center in France, what we call the Flux IRCAM, the IRCAM tools, for that matter of fact. A relationship that's been going on for over close to 10 years anyway, between Flux and IRCAM, where Flux is the software development partner for the IRCAM, and we're taking some of these algorithms, beautiful 30 years of research in acoustic and connective coordination, acoustic, and connective. We have really a great opportunity to be able to deliver this thanks to that relationship, really, that's been going on. And it's not like it's fully new. We'll talk about this. Spat existed as a plugin. Some of you actually on the live right now may be already familiar to the Spat environment from the plugin that existed close to 8-9 years ago called Spat. It was living on a digital audio workstation. It obviously meant as well that it was limited by the capabilities, the processing of the DAW it was sitting on. And really, the intention was, when we released this in 2017, to actually, become, big boys. Control of our destiny a bit with that standalone application, not forgetting the DAW integration, which we are doing now with the plugins, but really having a standalone application that's not limited to receiving audio from a DAW, that can actually be live as well, receiving, core audio and ASIO inputs. And really the way we've got it set up is that this open design gives you the ability to, configure your workflow as need be, and we'll dig into this, okay? Many environments, and many environments right now are actually turning to us and, asking questions about how to create immersive content. I mean, I think there's a global interest in creating immersive content more than ever today. Been reading some research recently that, 2020 is the year where, immersive explodes globally. Anyway. I'll take a deep breath a bit. As you see, my speed of talking can be fast. And the reason is I've got so many things to talk about. I'll take a little sip of water, which wouldn't be a bad thing. We are all in our homes. I'm assuming most of you are in your home somewhere, confined. We're obviously living, this situation. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're so happy to have, all your attention. I know, we're all living a tough moment. But at the same time, it's we've been blessed really with this opportunity to broadcast from you guys here, confined in a studio in some ways as well. Let's look at that actual plugin quickly. You see it there back in 2010 as it was running on the Pro Tools in this case right here. This open design approach means what? Means basically, you can actually maybe turn on the Spat computer on my right if you want, Guy, just quickly, to kind of get this idea of, basically, well, not this window really, my fault, my bad, but basically, this open design where you're basically going to be adding your inputs, choosing your room, how many rooms, your format, your stream time. It's reminding me of my good old days when I started in audio with BSS SoundWeb. Yeah, let me do a little quick one on this one, right? And when I saw BSS SoundWeb, which was basically, inputs and outputs and you putting blocks in between. And that's what we mean by this open design. Great, let's go back to where we were to talk about the actual applications and how, we can adapt to the workflow. So we can basically adapt to various workflow. We're going to cover them today. We'll talk about, maybe a bit of real-time integration or live integration. We'll talk about the fact that we have a simple integration with the DAW. With this plugin, with basically, once the templates are built, you can rapidly integrate Spat in your DAW on a single computer machine with something that we call software I/O, local path of audio. So yeah, anyway, let's jump into it. We've got more to talk about, and let's actually jump in. For some of you that were actually probably on the line 15 minutes before it started, we presented the making of Close Talker, which was an interesting show that we got involved, that happened here in Canada, for that matter of fact, last summer, if my memory is correct. Yeah, indeed, last summer. And the whole concept there was a band wanting to deliver their new album to a VIP crowd, a small group of people, and it was a small group because we had only 64 people on headphones on that one, but delivered actually a special a show that they call Immersion, an immersive concert on headphones, like really bringing the crowd, immersing the crowd and delivering them their new album from beginning to end in very awkward location, rooftop in Saskatchewan, all the way to, museums, or a really awkward location where typically the acoustic wouldn't really work great for doing so. And that was something that we did. So let's jump rapidly into it. Let's actually maybe get a quick audio listen. What you actually saw when we've turned to the Spat computer, let's turn to that Spat computer quickly here. What you actually saw is precisely what that Close Talker setup was all about, which basically a bunch of live sources fed from a live console, Avid S6L in this case. We have quite some integration there. So being fed to two computers, and these live inputs were actually being treated, if you want, by what we call the virtual rooms. In this case, one was a binaural audio one, so we delivered binaural audio content. We'll talk about this later. And you'll see our trick right now at the same time. We had a second room, which is a stereo room. And what was that? That was simply us saying kick, bass, and some instruments are actually, we're keeping intracranial. We're keeping, a very, a stereo, more punchy potentially. Binaural can have some impacts on tone, on tonality. So our strategy here, we keep that one, pretty tight. And then the rest of the elements, the other source, are hitting that binaural room, so we can move them around. Let's actually, let's just open this one. You actually see the scene right now and you'll see the bubble move, and they will be moving as I'm going to be playing this session to you guys. And these live were actually fired by the sound engineer. The sound engineer was not fully program in the sense that it was not following a time code or anything. The sound engineer, 2-3 places in the show, maybe in a solo, at specific moments, were firing those movements, moving some sources in the space. We're going to be playing this for you guys for about, a quick minute and a half. Maximum. We'll get the end of a solo and get through another song. Hopefully everything goes well there. To listen to binaural, we mean what? We mean we need some headphones. So I'm assuming most of you have some headphones on, and if you don't, that's okay. Now you may not be able to appreciate it as much, but let's do something quickly anyway, just to make sure that we've got the left on the left and the right on the right. Let me actually bring myself live to you from Spat. Can we actually hear this? You should be able. What I just basically did is I moved myself from the live stream, the live microphone going to you, to actually having you in Spat. You listen to me through Spat. So you should hear me in the front right now. Let's actually do a quick test to see if you actually can hear me on the left. You should be, yeah, it's okay. Working, well, that's good. Yes, I see, yes. So I see some people are getting the left side, and you may be getting the right side as I speak to you. And actually, we can even try to do the back. And the back is a bit more complex. We'll talk about HRTF filters and bits, but you probably are here feeling. Some of you may say, "Yeah, I'm getting it. If you're no longer in the front, you go, and that's that's the pleasure of playing in binaural. So now that we've kind of got set up. And you're hearing me in the reverb, and that's part of the acoustic simulation that we'll talk about. Let's go back to the live on the stream here. Are we back? Yeah, we should be back. Good stuff. Anyway, let me rapidly turn away from you guys just to prepare this. And actually, I should be putting some headphones as well. Not a bad thing to have some headphones to make sure whatever we're listening to, I can hear myself too. Okay. You do hear some room a bit, and that's the room of the studio right now, actually. Okay, I'm going to mute myself, try to play this for you guys. Enjoy.
Are carefully in the dark. Are carefully in the dark.
And we should be back. We should be back. You guys picked some of that? You guys must have picked up some of that. I hope you did. I actually saw some posts. Alicia in Toronto saying, yeah, Kellen was the guy that actually mixed this show. Took this project with us last summer. We did a little pre-pro. And what was kind of interesting as well is how we went from an offline, not being live, to prepare with Pro Tools some of this content, the artistic intention, and then moved it to a live. Yeah, hello to Kellen if he's online, actually. Don't know if he is, but I just saw, Alicia post a little hello. Yeah, Kellen actually worked on that mix that we've broadcasted to you. Thumbs up. We picked up something on this. It was kind of to explain you what was going on live, really, for the people, which was quite a unique experience. Let's move rapidly to just looking at this, as we'll take 2 seconds to jump into it. You can, no, not that one, actually, the other one. Thank you. Yes, just to give you briefly, for the ones that need to understand what's going on from a configuration perspective, what we actually see here is, how we add an audio interface. Basically, we're receiving MADI feeds, right? Live inputs. And we add a virtual production package, a Pro Tools winning equation whenever the band was not live to prepare, but basically an Avid S6L console feeding post fader pickup. This was live from the console behind me, by the way, that was going on, right? These tracks were coming in, post fader going to 2 Mac Mini computers in this little rack right here, doing a main and backup operation. As obviously we were live, we wanted to make sure, that we had a backup path, and these binaural feeds from the main and backup. I said feeds because we had actually more than the one that you saw there. Actually came back to the console to be distributed. That was it. That was the simple system. And thanks to the Spat plugin, this is what actually fired the movements from the console, the snapshots. When the guy was firing live movements, this was actually happening on the screen. Yeah, so that was just to kind of give you a quick idea, of these the actual 2 Mac Minis integrated. And then you have the actual audio portion, which are basically MADI flowing, to 2 computers. And then these live inputs, either coming live or from, so that's another scenario. So let's actually jump in right now to another actually typical use case here. We'll talk about Cirque du Soleil. We call it Cirque du Soleil typical approach. Actually, I should say big top typical approach, something that we've been working with. And it's a good example of some of the power in the live world anyway, or from a theatrical perspective. Basically, some of the interesting approach that we can do with this room concept. I'm actually going to be moving to my seat, and you'll be seeing me in another camera position for quite a while. I'll come back to you for some questions anyway. Let me actually jump and go sit down, and most probably take a pair of headphones as well. Aha. Okay. Yeah, hello, guys. How's everything going? Let me just ask out there, making sure everything is going well. Just position the microphone a bit. Yeah, I'm assuming we're all getting a good feed and everything is okay. Our friends are still online to answer any questions anyway. Let me just turn to my team and see how things are going out there. No message. Kelling, was that your board mixer post-mix? Oh, that's a question. Okay, we'll talk about this after that. Yeah, guys, if you actually, can tell me if everything is going well, we'll be continuing. And let's actually move right now to this other setup that I wanted to talk to you about. Okay, let's go. Let's move to my computer. Yeah, please. Indeed. Okay, so what you have actually on screen is sorry for this noise, what you actually have in front of you here is the overlay. You actually see the overlay into the Spat environment. And this is the overlay, basically a top view of a speaker arrangement for a Cirque du Soleil project. And just so you guys understand what's been going on here is you got a single source. We'll be able to listen. Forget about the source aspect. There's a single stereo element that we're able to play. But what I want you to put some attention on right now is these multiple rooms that we call them, the room. And the room in this particular case was, the possibility to actually do various things. That's what we're going to talk about briefly to give you an example. I'm going to jump on the first one here, which we've called the 5-1. And people may be asking, well, why 5-1? What's the big thing with a 5-1 in a live concert? Well, let's just talk about briefly what we were capable to do. Typical Cirque du Soleil, arrangement or big top arrangement with mast, 4 masts in a big room. You've got, these audience, we call them audience, faces if you want. You could say that you've got one there, you've got obviously the front ear, and you've got that one. And typically this is the backstage area. So what basically went on this particular one here is we've decided that for the music bed, to surround people in a good music bed, something static, not as much for movements, more for creating a space for the bass, for the music. We have this concept here where we basically, are creating, so Spat is generating a 5.1 mix, and this is the space. And this same actual distribution, the 5.1 arrangement, is actually distributed as well on this one and as well on this one, on this face. Why? Well, you'll see, we'll actually jump to the next arrangement and you'll actually understand what I'm talking about here. So you see, so this is actually this, more of the speaker elements of the system. And what you see here are the speakers, and for that matter of fact, there's actually way more speakers that you see on these systems. Why? Because obviously that particular speaker may be, handled by, 5 or 10 speakers in the back with the matrixing that gets done, in the loudspeaker management side of things. But what I want to show you here is that we actually just jumped to another room here. Okay, and so this other room here is actually what we call, using a panning type or a strategy called KNN. And what was allowed there was basically a complete localization. So this room was used strictly for localization, not necessarily all sources, some sources you wanted to localize, and you could basically, take this actual source in the space and position a mono source, a stereo source, whatever source you want it to be in the localization room, we like to call it. Let's actually play something for you guys, and what you're going to be seeing on the screen is my QLab. I'm going to be using QLab just to fire some stuff for you guys, and let's try that. Let's get some audio going. Et voilà. Okay, so we got some audio going. You should be hearing, what you're actually hearing now is that K&N room, we call that speaker arrangement in binaural. So we offer binaural preview, and that's a perfect example of how content creation can be done, offline content creation for sound designers. So right now, I'm going to be moving this source in the space, and you should actually feel it jump. And you say, Hugo, that's not cool panning. Why is it jumping that much? Well, we're actually going to talk about this. We'll talk about this later when we talk about K&N. And K&N's ability to have, and we'll talk about it later anyway. So basically, we're previewing this in binaural right now as I was moving the source. And we had another room that we were using here, only a partial, in a part of the speaker arrangement. And why were we doing this? Well, this was for specific circle effects that we call it. We call them the VBAP circle room, and that's exactly what it was. It was some sources were basically hitting this room strictly for some, circular effect. Oh, I'm not watching the camera again. That was my habit of yesterday, getting too much in the screen and forgetting to see you guys. Yeah, the pleasure of the live. So that was my little preview. And the binaural was very practical for this show. Why? Because every single sources could hit the binaural room. So if you want to send that binaural recording to video cameras, to video feeds, there it is. Instead of being, just listening to a stereo mix, now you're actually in binaural, on the recordings that you're distributing, the content that you're distributing out there. So just a brief example of what this was all about. And with this overlay concept, if you have some questions, we're actually going to jump into it a bit later. Now, let me fire and actually move to the, let's just go to the PowerPoint for a second, my friend. Yeah, thank you. I love it. Back to that license question, eh? Yes. Okay. So what did we achieve with that actual, approach I was talking about? Is like multiple rooms for multiple creative effects. That was really what went on, on this. So, we had the bass bed that was a 5.0 that was distributed to 3 audience zones, we could call it. It was one. There was obviously the other one that was the localization with all. We didn't necessarily have all loudspeaker. We had like some specific, location that could actually help us localize. And then the third one was actually with only a part of the system, a partial. And choosing the panning type, to the desired effect was really the key to this. As the object spatialization properties are agnostic of the output, that's the magic of it. That's the magic of what we have on the table as well. You can flip this actual, the actual room type speaker arrangement, we could call it channel based, or to ambisonic for that matter of fact, without affecting the object properties, the parameters of these objects. We'll talk about this. And the binaural recording, which was, for, previewing. And that actually, brings us quickly anyway to offline creation. As you were auditioning, with me moving the source, that means that, someone can rapidly, with QLab, for example, or, some of a show controller, live show controller, prepare offline the movements, the cues, building cue lists, some movement intentions, and before the show moves to actually live production. Before a show moves to actually live production, you can actually, preview, audition, all that. So we still got some water dripping on the ceiling. That's the fun part. That was actually, confinement time, there's no worker to repair the ceiling, so I've been getting some water leaks right there. You may see some splash there. It's immersive. It's about an experience. I'm living one right now. Okay, let's jump back. Well, not before we jump back. Let's just rapidly, talk about this live integration as we've covered it. We'll take some questions later. But in the live scenario, we're basically getting, our audio from local I/O devices, being a MADI device, being, an audio interface of some sort, or network-based, so AES 67, AVB, Dante, name it. Basically anything that supports, that is based around ASIO or core audio. And we'll talk about these computers behind Spat later on. The show controllers, I had QLab briefly there, which we use quite a bit. But another interesting one is Ovation from a company called Merging Technology, PC-based only. Great show controller. They're actually working on some OSC recording functions right now as well, and OSC edit. Be quite interesting for the theatrical world anyway, or anything that's a live show control. Something that we're not going to get too deep today, but the real-time tracking as well, could be integrated in the live. We support up to 64 tracking devices, which actually I say for live, but live broadcast as well as in our environment that we've been seeing these black track system, for example, tracking, tracking talking heads really on a studio in a studio. For localization. And we are using intensively OSC, being for anything, basically can speak OSC. We do this with QLab, with Ovation. Obviously, we have a dictionary that allows you to control pretty much anything into Spat. So that's kind of our little parenthesis on the live integration. The Spat plugin is still used in live worlds as well, in the console, specifically to S6L today. So most of the other integration, for example, Digico console and the live, we're using the generic OSC capability of the system. Just a quick parenthesis on the live production to say that we are coming with some new things. Well, the first one is actually not specific to live production environment. And when I mean my live production, again, we're not necessarily talking only about broadcast, about live, but we're talking about broadcast. We're talking about even to some extent, anything that there's a live production. But some specific features for these markets, such as server and renderer, concept. So we call it the server client concept. And so it's the ability to have computer processing, a main and backup unit processing, while a third computer is actually the client, the user interface. So separating user interface and processing, coming down the line rapidly, hopefully in a few weeks, months, whatever. We're working very hard. Wave field synthesis with an option for frontal system is another one that's coming down the line. For the ones that are familiar with wave field synthesis, we're talking here about a synthesis, a mechanism that allows us to replicate. Let me call it, use the word replicate the wavefront of every single sources. This mechanism uses delay, this mechanism uses filtering, a lot of mathematics and processing going behind it, but basically all speakers in a frontal arrangement or in a line are contributing to creating the wavefront, to regenerating the wavefront of every single elements in the space. Very powerful. It is, it helps us to solve the problem of sweet spot centric panning that we'll talk about. And new speaker configuration things that are coming. Let's talk now about studio production. Which is the other obviously natural one. And by studio production, we can mean post-production, we can mean music production. We basically mean any production environment where you want to create some immersive content. We're going to be exploring some of that today. And what we're going to be exploring is how with Spat we can deliver deliver and monitor various formats at the same time. I'm going to be bringing Atmos 22.2 and multiple binaural streams into the equation, and we'll actually briefly look at the automation that we'll be able to do with it. So let's actually, let's just finish booting the Pro Tools, see how things are going here before we switch. I'm still with you. Okay. We can switch to that screen in a second. So what we're going to have in front of you here is, and I'm actually going to start right away to bring this concept. Yeah, let's move to this quickly. So here you have my little production environment example. You see NHK bin up there for binaural and Atmos. And this is the production environment I wanted to show you. And just to kind of, I've opened a session. You guys are like, well, okay, how did he get there? Well, we're going to get to this point explaining you, from beginning to end how to connect all these points. But if I close, this actual session, and I press the get send returns here on top here, I'm actually seeing all the actual Spat plugins that are live into where? Into Pro Tools for the example of today. Same thing for Reaper, same thing for Logic, same thing for Nundo. Same thing for any DAW that we can support with this local integration, what we call the local audio path. So basically, once your template is built, once you've actually created this, you're kind of good to go to for very rapid integration of this immersive. Basically, it comes and tap to your Pro Tools environment or your the studio workflow. Just to briefly talk about the session we have in front here, the first element is this piano track, that is not playing right now because there's no session, but you'll see in 2 seconds. The piano track is our live instrument, is our track itself. We obviously would have multiple ones on the session. But what we're doing in this particular one is we're using auxes. All the things in blue right now will become objects into Spat. The reason we're doing this approach and not necessarily sending the track directly, well, multiple reasons in the case of Pro Tools and other DAWs, is the fact that this would be a pre-fader send. If you're inserting on the actual track, so pre-fader, not necessarily practical to keep all your to keep your template being able to move the faders and so on and so forth. Number one. Number two, people are doing parallel processing, and we're basically with this, we're not touching your actual mix environment. We're using these sends, these objects, and these sends can be, a single source or multiple source. You can deal that, as a, one track, one source kind of deal, or multiple tracks. Like, for example, the drum may be an actual stereo stem, which you'd be sending to a stereo, which we have here 4 stereos. You'll see if I'm playing that track right now, if you've played that track, actually I've got that piano being sent to one of the stereo elements that's showing up on the other side. And we have actually the returns as well. So the returns, you can see an Atmos return, an NHK, 1, 2, and 3. Why 3 NHK, Hugo? Well, simply because Pro Tools is limited, in this case, to 16 channel. So we have some time to do some little, workarounds to deal with the limitation of DAW. Obviously, some other DAWs, such as Reaper, that supports 64 channels, and other, Nundo, and I don't know the list exactly of what's for bus channel count, but sometimes we actually have to return in multiple buses, and this is what we're doing here. An NHK 22x2 gets returned in 3 8-channel, 22 plus 2, 24. You do the math, 3 times 8. So that's the deal there. But we are actually being able to return an Atmos, to bounce, or to monitor, and that's actually moved to all these binaural. These binaural here are there, and we'll see it in the Spat session in 2 seconds, to give you some preview, some various previews with various HRTF, which we'll talk about later, and actually as well, a binaural main, which is an actual binaural mix per se that you can bounce. So let's look at back to Spat. This is it. We'll deal with with these Spat sends. You can see them up there. Hey, hello Spat send. Spat send is there, and it's actually local audio path is enabled. And by enabled, it means the audio connection between. If there's no audio connection in between, the Spat plugin still gets used, and in this case, is only for automation. So this little baby there and the multiple babies that we have in the session are serving 2 things: the local audio between the Spat and the Pro Tools on the send and on the return, and as well as all the automation. Because as you will see, later, we can obviously deal, and actually, let's just put this in. It's not the right one. Let's put this in right. Auto right, thank you. So we're actually going to be able to talk about this automation here. Going back to Spat, let me open the session. I don't feel like building it with you guys right now. We are going to start to make templates available to you guys. Feel free right now, if you're on the chat and you want to have some specific workflow for your environment. We're actually, we're going to be collecting this and trying to make a list of things that people are kind of wanting to see for templates. But you've already may have seen 3 videos that we've just released. One was for Pro Tools integration, 5-minute on tutorial on how to configure it. There's a few things to keep in mind when we're configuring a DAW. Routing, we use the dummy bus as well. Don't want to get too deep into this, but this concept is, in some cases, a DAW, the dummy bus concept gets used to actually force a DAW to process the Spat sends before the Spat return, for example, to ensure some synchronization. We also have a few, routing, things that we've got to keep in mind to make sure there's good synchronization with both of them. So we're going to start to make those templates available, some instructions that exist already, documents on this. And as I said, we've just released tutorial. Pro Tools was released, Reaper, I think Pyramix system from Merging just came out. We're working on Logic, and we'll be doing some more of that. But feel free, just jump on this. Yeah, I see 22.251, yeah, basically. And you'll see how quick it is to change it. I mean, once you figure it out, once you figure out what we're doing, you use a template. You can rapidly modify that template once you get the concept of it. Okay, so I've just reopened this session here, and we've got all these sources that are sitting into these rooms. This is our environment, right? We see an NHK2 22.2 environment there. If I actually take this view here on top, I change it to top and front. Actually, I can see a top view and a front view of that NHK. Binaural, no more speakers, and this is what speakers, we'll talk about the options and when we're in the rooms and the viewing options. When I move to binaural room, there's no longer speakers because there's no concept of speakers. There's only our listening ed, or dummy ed. And next, and not least for sure, Atmos, so creating content. People asked yesterday, Atmos, how you deal with Atmos, what's your link to? Well, we don't have link. I mean, Atmos, Dolby's production suite is a solution in itself, for live as well, as I've seen, they've been, proposing some live scenarios. But to create that bass bed, that Atmos bed, basically that tie, for example, with Pro Tools and Spat is a perfect, example of how, you can move to, replacing that panner, that not necessarily fun panner, to being in a object-oriented or a, source-oriented environment, and the acoustic simulation, which we'll talk about. So here you see the Atmos, you can see the elevation, but our sources are actually all sharing the same properties as I move through all of them. So here I get, a mono source, and we'll see it when we, if we solo it actually. You see a mono source in the space, and actually it's moving in all the rooms at the same time. So our setup here, just so we kind of go over it. So our setup here is NHK, as we were talking about. Let me listen to it briefly. We can listen to it, maybe. It's not working. Why? Because I didn't connect something. Let me just see. Okay. It should be. You know what? Someone should tell me. Hugo, you solo the source. At least one person's following. Not me anyway. Okay. You should hear me. I hope the balance is good. I can probably drop the level just a tiny bit. So right now what we're listening to, let me just drop this room a bit. So what you're actually listening to right now is my famous piano. My piano track that I was playing earlier, it's actually sitting right there. I can actually solo it, and we can start to manipulate it. And you may be saying, Hugo, your piano seems wet a bit. Indeed, the piano's wet, and it's no longer wet now. And that was just because the reverb engine, the acoustic simulation, which we'll talk about, was actually active. It's all active by default. There's some reason to disengage it, but once you figure out the power of the reverb engine and the early reflection localization, you kind of figure out that you may want to be using it. And so right now what you're listening to is the binaural feed. You're actually listening, let me go back to this setup. You're actually listening to this module right there, indeed, which is basically you listening to a binaural monitor, or binaural preview, I should say, a binaural preview of what? Of this NHK 22.2 arrangement. So you don't need to necessarily have a 22.2 arrangement to monitor it. The binaural can actually help you preview all this. Let me just play that track again. Okay, so we're in the NHK, as I was saying. We'll get into, these source parameters, because there's quite a bit of parameters. If I move it, it should work for you guys. Moving the distance. We'll talk about these parameters that makes, the distance and the signal drop as we move in distance. And re-enable the reverb if I want. Probably seeing on the right side right now, you're probably feeling, that room, that's the tail actually that gets diffused. Okay, so that's what we've got going. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how did we get there? How did we get to create this template? We'll talk about all these source parameters. We'll talk about these various rooms. Same applies for the Atmos, right? If I unmute this Atmos, I am creating an Atmos bed right there that's returning. If we go to, yeah, you see it right there. I could be bouncing this, whatever position. The automation aspect, we're, well, let's just do it. If I replay this, I should be able to move this, right? And let's see. Not working or not working. Maybe not. Yeah, it is working. Look at that. All right, so as simple as this, the Spat plugin as well brings us the automation. So you can be moving the source in the Spat, in a third-party controller, or if you prefer, straight on the timeline, picking up any of the parameters. Yay. Okay. I'm going to be taking some questions shortly anyway. How long was that? Yeah, it was way too long again, like yesterday. Let me just... That's the power of Hugo when he gets talking and excited. Let's move to the actual PowerPoint. Quick, Guy, please. So we've talked about this. I thought it was important to start with the introduction to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing and where we're coming from these various markets. The fact that there's an open design means that there's a template involved, but it means as well that you have the power of creating your own environment. Once that environment is created, you're set. We didn't even talk about the fact that maybe you have got a controller surface in your studio, and obviously all these parameters of the Spat send would be mapping potentially to that control surface. You can get your hands on controlling only the parameters that you really care about, being the parameters of the source and so on and so forth. And we'll dig into this anyway. Module 1 is completed, and we have some questions. Etienne Collin asked a question. That sounds French. Do I know an Etienne? Bonjour, Etienne. I can even try to answer it in French to make it a bit global. And Dave Thiel asked a question. Kellen, what was that, your board mix or a post mix? Close talker, good question. This is exactly basically the session that Kellen did, and I picked it up. It was not done on this console specifically, but the actual Mac Minis that are there were the ones that were deployed on the tour. So it was pretty damn close from it. I have been playing with things, subtle things, and as you can imagine, Kellen is not there to fire the movements. So what I did is wherever he was doing those, I've recorded this in Pro Tools. I know where the memory location was. So today in this setup, Pro Tools is playing. So you understand the setup, right? Pro Tools is playing through the S6L console, AVB audio, and the post fader of each of those channels are hitting the two Spat computers right there. Okay, main and backup. So it's very close from what Kellen did. So to answer your question, anyway, were you using KEMAR HRTF for the audience during the live show? The famous question, indeed. For this, in the case of the live show, well, during the live show, we've used actually two things. The session that you saw was only one binaural room with KEMAR, and what you were listening here today was KEMAR, indeed. But we were as well doing 1040 HRTF, if my memory is correct. We were delivering two binaural feeds, potentially anyway, that went back to the console. So each Spat, we're delivering two binaural, one in KEMAR, one in 1040, and the intent was to have an alternate HRTF. We'll get into the HRTF connection anyway later. And I said, Etienne, I'm going to answer your question in French, and I did in English, you see. Too many things are going on around me right now. Donc, voilà, la réponse était que on utilisait effectivement KEMAR et on avait une version 1040 HRTF utilisée dans le live. Et voilà. On a beaucoup utilisé le 1040, mais je ne sais pas exactement, je ne me rappelle pas. Kellen serait la personne à répondre pour savoir si c'est toujours été le cas. Voilà, mais on va parler. We're going to be speaking about HRTFs anyway later. Kellen post mix. Sylvain, the plugin Sen is pre-fader, so how do you manage the volume automation in your track? The plugin Sen is pre-fader. Well, the plugin is not the plugin per se that's pre-fader. Is the DAW that is pre-fader or not? So some DAW, and I hate to actually mention all the DAWs. Team, please jump in. For sure, I know that Nundo offer post fader on the insert, which is obviously great for automation. So basically, in the case when we have a DAW that's actually post or pre-fader only, this is why we have those sends. And maybe you can bring me back to the Pro Tools view, Guy, please. Just so you guys can understand that that's why we're using these sends here. These sends, can be automated right? These sends can be automated. They become your source, and that's how we have, we have a post departure, right? Basically, your contribution, your automation here becomes the contribution to this send anyway. Because yes, you're right, it is still pre. Answering the question correctly, sorry, it was maybe a bit confusing. If there's more questions that pops up, but that's really what it is. You're right. The fader per se is, but the send is pre-fader, but as we're going through a Knox and a Knox sense, this is the send, by the way, right? So if I'm obviously automating movements, automation here, the signal is going to change on the object, the send to spat. Making sense? Yeah. So we're using sends. We're sending to bus. What's the audio processing latency on the Mac Mini? Ha 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 ha. Who's that? Sébastien? Oh, is he a French guy or an English guy? Or someone else from the world? Good question. The latency conversation, specifically to the show of our friends from Close Talker, we were at 10 millisecond, which was more than enough, obviously, more than, no problem for this scenario. Now, some people may say, well, but for in-ear monitoring, it's not going to work. You're right. And I'm not here to talk about in-ear monitor workflow. The rules of thumb, and we'll talk about it later, is the following. The computer that you're using and the audio interface is what defines your latency and how low you can go for live. You want to achieve 3, 4, 5 millisecond. You definitely are not going to turn to a Mac Mini, for example. Not in the current state. Why is this? Keep in mind that a Mac Mini does not have any graphic resources, and keep in mind that Spat and the user interface is active, taking quite a bit of graphic resources at the same time. Plus you're processing, you're creating reverb. There's quite a bit going on. So the point is that for doing a real low latency type scenario under 5 mil, for example, you definitely want to have the proper computer behind it, being a custom PC machine or being some of the machine that had dedicated graphic. We'll talk about recommended scenario later, but specifically to this one, 10 millisecond was the question. Okay, if my memory is correct, and this is what you add going on. You can actually, you want a 10 millisecond. You can actually always see this information on the bottom right, and the latency you see there is not the latency of Spat. Spat does not bring latency per se. What it does, a little water again, a little splash. What it actually means, it's the system reported latency of the audio interface you're using, and second one, the buffer in Spat. And the buffer is important. And obviously you want to do low buffer for live, you need to have the proper machine and hardware to support it anyway. Okay, cool. Moving on, no more questions, I think? No. And I was supposed to sign up to go, for the questions, but everything's going well, I'm assuming. Let's go on and let's move to our next section. Okay, we're going to start to explore. I'm going to keep this position. Yeah, I kind of like that position. I like the camera view there. If I was to watch the camera once in a while. So we're going to be exploring Spat Revolution software right now. Yeah, no more questions? Yeah, okay, good. Hugo, you're not looking at the camera again. Yay, thank you guys. Yeah, I'm not seeing this one. I will. I'm just too many screens around me. That's the pleasure of all the screens. So we're going to be exploring now, Spat Revolution, and as far as the environment, we've already jumped into it. We'll go deeper into exploring the environment, okay? Let's do that together. Spatialization technology, channel-based, speaker arrangement. We'll go through basically everything, the key things to know about this environment. And then we're actually going to connect boxes together. Yay? Sounds like a plan? Let's do it. Okay. Let's unpollute. Let's go back to my computer. Let's remove our Pro Tools for the moment. Okay. Well, we can actually keep working on this environment. For that matter of fact, there's nothing wrong with it. So let's talk about this environment. Really, you guys most probably have a license of Spat Revolution. I hope so. If you did not get your license, you can contact us. Pick up on the chat. Felix will probably help you out. In theory, we delivered a bunch of licenses to you guys for a 90 days trial, so you can actually follow me here, connect your local audio, and hopefully you guys are actually listening to me live. You could actually, with Dante Via, listening to me, my feed live through your Spat if you want it really to push it and, bring my source into an acoustic space of some sort. So, okay, so you most probably have the software. Hopefully you have it in front of you. If not, that's all good as well. You just got to be following what's going on. So what you've got, you've got the preferences on the top right that you see. We'll jump later. And these are actually the rooms. You figure this out, and I can mute the rooms if I don't want them to output or not. And just by clicking on them, or for that matter of fact, double-clicking on the room, I get into the actual room itself. And this is our environment. And if we get into these rooms, and you'll always be having the same kind of view. It's either, and look at the top right here, the view button. You by default going to be looking at a top view. Now, why is it grayed out? Well, because I'm actually muted. So when we mute an arrangement, it basically the outputs are actually grayed out. And if if you actually scroll in and out, you can see how I can kind of go in this arrangement or not. And let me just give you a shortcut. If you hold the control button, you can actually spin that room. Here's our 22.2 arrangement. And I can actually go to the Atmos one. Well, you see, it followed me actually when I'm spinning the room. It actually followed me. So I've got the same perspective now on the Atmos arrangement. If we actually go for strictly a front, we can go to that, or we can go to a top front. Same thing for that matter of fact. You can rotate that, whatever was a front view, you can kind of give it a bit of perspective if you wanted to. Okay, so this is our space. This is our space. Let me just go back to, just go back quickly to something that I had forgotten to do. Up. Let me just close this session quick. Voila. And you see when I'm closing Pro Tools, you get, understand if the box are a little red here, but there's no more signal. There's just no more signal coming from this. The only live one right now is this one. This is not to do at home. This is Hugo does only. This is actually my QLab receiving audio at the same time. You see, crazy. So I'm removing the inputs right now. You're just looking at the output section, something that we'll talk a bit more about connecting these blocks later on. But you're looking basically only at from the room to the output of. And if you got a single audio track, let's play it. It's playing from QLab. And let's connect it to one room. Connect it. And then we can connect the same room in multiple spaces at the same time. Up, 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 up. Voila. Okay. The reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to get some audio going. I want you to appreciate as well something called a nebula, something I did not cover yesterday. Nebula is basically, giving you a visual reference as far as, basically taking all the output. Let me just reset this. I can see it there fairly well. All right, so I'm going to be moving the source around. You'll see how this will impact actually the signal distribution. Makes better sense if I actually close the reverb engine. All right, you see that stereo source here, right there, in front of you. This is the nebula that you can actually remove or put on. Takes quite a bit of graphical resources as well. Again, don't do this on these little Mac Minis. Anyway, I've got some personal challenges with these Mac Minis, although I love them in some ways. The speaker alpha is you seeing or not seeing the speakers. And then the scale, if you want to you got a lot of elements, or no, you're the kind of person that, wants big things. Some lightness, a little control. So this is basically, your view, your space. That's the space. That's the space where your object, your sources are living. Source properties are on the bottom. We'll explore them in 2 seconds. If I'm minimizing this window here, I can actually have a better, kind of view here. While we're talking about this, we've got the output section of this room. This is basically, giving you all the actual speakers itself. We'll talk about some of the background image thing that can be done. And this is the reverb engine. Not going to deal too much about the reverb engine right now. We've got 2 modes, a 8 and 16 channel density mode. Obviously, the 16 channel render beautiful results takes more resources. And there's all these parameters, perceptual factors, room response and stuff. That that basically tailors that reverb engine for that room only, the acoustic, the space, right? And if I actually re-engage it, right, you remember, right? Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. Let me just switch back quickly to talk about a few other things. Let's go back to the PowerPoint here. So you kind of explored, the actual room itself, and we'll go in the actual properties right now of these objects. And what's important to understand on these objects is how, and we'll go to an overview, but how, you've got a few important ones. Well, we're not going to go through all of them. This could be a session itself to appreciate the acoustic properties. and the audio properties of all these objects, what they really do, what they mean. We'll briefly cover the perceptual factors, which are key. They're attached to this reverb engine, right? That's the source and the space, the source pointing at you or not pointing at you, and stimulating the acoustic simulation or not. We're going to be talking as well about position and radiation. Important concept to understand. What basically they mean is, some of you may be familiar to polar and Cartesian, X, Y, Z versus azimuth, the 360-degree pan, elevation, obviously the elevation, and the distance, which is, so this is AED, this is polar, this is called radiation, versus position, which is true X, Y, Z. We actually offer both. Some systems offer one or the other, we offer both. They're totally linked. We'll talk about this. But the other important one will be to understand is the concept of radius, which we'll talk a bit in this setup. So yeah, you've got some information here kind of on the overview on the source parameters. I'm going to get ready to jump back with you on the Spat computer as you maybe be reading some of what's going on. Yeah, let's just go back on the slide quick. Yeah, so as I was saying, these sources have that radiation or position parameter. It's always from the listening point. The distance is that sense of proximity. The signal, basically a signal drop. This is the point where when you're starting to move the distance, the signal is going to start to drop. And for this, you need to define where the signal is going to start dropping. We call this the radius, and this is what we're going to get to. Let's actually, let's jump in. We'll talk about the LFE send as well when we're on a .1 system and how spreading can get applied. So let's jump back into the sources, please. Yeah, thank you. So we've got our source. If I actually double click on that source, or if you go with the little arrow there, you basically maximize, or you open the sub-menu, the menu for that source only. And this are the settings for that source. If I had 20 sources, what would it mean? Well, it would basically mean that each of them have their parameters. I can actually multi-select. Let me just do it for that sake of it. All right, I'm just going to do something quick. Up. Let me bring a source. Yes, and it's giving me a sync error, and that's normal. What I want to show you is, so you can obviously, there's multi-selecting, shift multi. Right now, you're actually, selecting multiple source and basically, working together as a group. Okay, let's go back to where we were. Sorry, let me remove this to clean this up. And you see the sync was gone. Why was there a sync problem? Let's talk about it. It's because I just injected an input that's actually an hardware input versus a software input. Synchronization problem. There's one is on the hardware, the other one's getting a pat from the software. That's why the sync came up, by the way, for people that are curious. Okay, so we've got a source here. Our source, we can actually keep playing it in the background. It's never bad to have some audio. I'm assuming the level is good and you can hear me. So let's talk about these perceptual factors to begin with. I briefly talked about it, the reverb engine. And let's talk about the reverb engine here. What I just did here is actually close the direct sound. That's the first one of the perceptual factors that we want to talk about here. Just crank the volume just a tiny bit. So right now what you're hearing, I just closed the tail, just closed the cluster. We're actually down to what? To early reflection only. And you're probably realizing that the early reflection on the left side right now, and why is this? Spat actually brings the capability to localize the early reflection. And localizing means what? Means actually bringing a sense of reality. The sources there and the early reflection are with it, number one. Number two, not sure if you're going to pick this one up. This is the cluster, okay? And what's interesting with the cluster, you can hear it. Can you hear it on the right side? It's not localized right now. What's interesting with the cluster, actually, and what I just did with that pan-rev parameter, which we often forget to talk about, but it's a quite important one. I just relocalized the cluster with the source, okay? Very powerful. So instead of being completely diffused, by default, it's diffused. That's why you're hearing it on both ears. And now, last but not least, the room. That gets controlled by the room presence, that actual tail, okay? That's actual tail of the system. And that's basically, what our perceptual factors are all about. I'm not going to go too deep into it. You can appreciate the warmth and brilliance aspect of, of the perceptual factors, and the running reverberance and envelopment. The feeling of an envelopment is really what it is. So those are coming from studies from the IRCAM, and instead of just giving you parameters that don't mean necessarily anything, we're trying to express them in in something that you can perceive, right? Envelopment is one of them, for example, or the running reverberance. And so that's it. I just brought back what? I just brought back the room presence. Now the direct sound, right? Killing the reverb. Okay, back to this dry source. Just drop it, make sure you can hear me. We'll leave it on the left side anyway. Let me just jump to these parameters, which are radiation, right? And actually, you see that the source already has some distance to it. And you see, I just reset it, the parameter. By the way, you reset the parameter by just double-clicking on it. You can right-click on it, reset, but double-clicking on it, resetting it. And what I just did is I brought back the source's default, this default position. Let's talk about radiation as we start to talk about this. The sense of distance of a source is actually defined by a parameter that's right there that's called radius. You see, I'm lowering that radius and signal's going away. I'm further away from the radius. Important to understand. We'll talk about speaker arrangement later, and what we're actually doing here is, and I can close the source for a second. What's important to understand with the radius concept, and by default radius are 2 meter, and by default all the speaker arrangement, if you take an NHK 22.2, Atmos, 5.1, 7.1, whatever predefined arrangement that we offer, they're all 2 meter. It means what? 2 meter normalized. It means what? It means that basically by default, the source are sitting at the speaker line, and as you're starting to move away, and let's do this visually, by default, if I reset this, this source, the source is sitting minus 30 plus 30 on an NHK 22.2 arrangement. The radius is actually right there at the speaker line, and as I start moving this source, I'm basically, reducing the amplitude on it, okay? Based on that. Hope that makes sense. We'll take questions on them as they come up. So back to our source parameters. So, azimuth, easy. Elevation, we don't see it. Well, we see it right there. Elevation right there. And then distance, obviously, if I'm moving the source in the space. Yaw, pitch, and aperture. Yaw is the direction of the source. If I'm actually spinning the source, one side or the other. Pitch is pitching up and down. And aperture is the source exciting more the room, or it's more, think about it in an aperture in a camera. So basically, how many degrees the source is opening and exciting the room, obviously, with the acoustic simulation. Obviously, it will have an impact as well when the perception, when the reverb engine is off. You're kind of going to get the filtering from something that's, closer like that versus open. Trying to do something here to give you an idea of what that could be. Anyway, X, Y, Z, you're positioning this in X, Y, Z. But as you're seeing here, the source is moving still and as you're moving the X, the source is actually moving kind of in an interesting way, in a polar way. And this is the coordinate modes right there. When you change them, basically multi-channel sources, primarily a mono source doesn't have that same behavior necessarily, but multi-channel sources will behave. Because right now I'm bringing mono and stereo sources, but for that matter of fact, if you saw my production workflow earlier, I had a 5.1 and a 7.1. So yeah, you can take a 5.1 and respatialize a 5.1 on an Atmos or an NHK 22.2 arrangement, and it will all be sitting. We could actually do this, we'll do it later. We'll do it later when we actually get the deal about, you may have seen it already, but you know what, let's take the time. Let's take the time. It takes 2 seconds anyway to reopen that production environment. Templates. Actually, how do you design a Spat Revolution? I'm going to take some questions while that's booting. Anyway, I will get that one done. How do you design in Spat Revolution when you are at home studio without the correct speaker setup? Speaker setup, let's say, the minimal 5.1, let's say. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question, but I'm going to jump back to this, and maybe Nicolas and Jean-Luc can precise a bit what they meant here. So I wanted to appreciate there's a 7.1 and a 5.1 in this. If we go to the NHK 22, you probably have seen it. I'm going to solo on it. You see, so this is, this is a 5.1 bed sitting on an actual NHK 22.2, and this is that same bed sitting on the Atmos arrangement. So yeah, you can respatialize, and it's moving as an actual multi-channel source. That's why, we start to talk about the behavior of multi-channel with, polar and coordinate modes. Anyway, so that's kind of a little parenthesis about how do we deal with multi-channel sources. Multi-channel or multi-selected and ends up being the same thing. Let's just jump on the rapidly. Let's just jump rapidly on the actual keynote. Yeah, exactly. Just appreciate what kind of is going on, on this. you see the polar and the Cartesian model and how a multi-channel source behaves differently anyway. If it's, polar, it's kind of following the circles around the head, where the Cartesian is not. Just two different modes. So, if you're building automation, that can become quite interesting, obviously. Okay, good. Have we actually missed some things? There's always a great bunch of things to talk about. But that gives you kind of an idea of what can be done. Okay, spread, spread is interesting. It's how basically you're spreading over more speakers. You're basically starting to break apart, if you want, in some ways. The basic panning lines start to spread. Something is too localized, For example, you can, too direct, but yeah, too much directivity on it. You can basically spread on multiple arrangement. LFE send is there for you. This is the send for that particular source itself going to the sub, the LFE. We have a single send right now. So although we can have multiple subs, we support only a single send currently, but you can have multiple departures, multiple sub on the speaker arrangement, but you have only one send per se per source though, so some can have no LFE. And other things here, which I'm not gonna cover today, the radius is the important one to understand. If that radius was by mistake put at 0.4 meter, what's gonna happen is your source is gonna feel like it's, far, right? And that's just because of the relationship, the position of the source, let me just drop this here. The position of the source and the position of the radius would basically gives it a huge drop. 6 dB drop factor, every time you double the distance. So yeah, that could be changed though. But anyway, yeah, voila. So that's basically what I want to talk to you about. Let's jump back to other aspects of what we're going to talk about, rooms. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. So the virtual rooms and these spaces, the acoustic space, what basically, to remember, I think I've covered it briefly, is that they bring either various stream type, producing, rendering, bouncing, monitoring, channel-based system like we saw here, or we haven't talked about I-order ambisonic or ambisonic. We support all the way to 7th-order I-order ambisonic HOA. So you can actually change these rooms in 2 seconds in HOA. We're actually going to take a look at that quickly. And then binaural, same story. So these, so really why do you have multiple rooms? The idea is to have potentially, delivering multiple different content at the same time. They can be as well various acoustic space, maybe, room number 1, same speaker arrangement, same speaker arrangement in 2 rooms, but with a different reverb setting, right? So maybe, some short, long, or whatever it is. It's like bringing source in different spaces. It can be practical to do a VR to build a scene, Some sources will appear in something very dry, or, we have only early reflection, really, and not necessarily the tail of a verb, and so on and so forth. So that can be the other practical one. It can be based on application, like we saw with the typical Cirque du Soleil workflow, where a room was for localize, one room was to build an audience zone, deliver to audience zone a bass music bed, and the other one was a specific map, not all speakers, only the one, around, kind of deal. Again, the panning method can be the strategy with multiple room, right? One for VBAP, one for KNN, and we'll talk about DBAP as well. You have various panning methods, so you can obviously, use the rooms for that particular scenario. Okay. So what do we have for stream type possible? As we've talked about these, we're actually going to jump to Spat back in 2 seconds, but we've got all channel-based arrangement, 2D and 3D. They're available as as possible stream. We've got mid-side arrangement as well, binaural B format, which is an ambisonic of 1st order, or I-order ambisonic all the way to 7th order. Okay, and let's just briefly talk about binaural because it's a question that comes up, for people that are not familiar with binaural. And I think there's a question: is how do you design Spat Revolution when you're at home, an home studio, without the correct speakers set up? Well, binaural can be an answer. That's exactly what I was doing. When you guys were listening in binaural, you were basically preparing on a speaker arrangement, visualizing where things were outputting. Not sure that's exactly the question. Is there minimal setup is the question. I'll get back to questions anyway. But this binaural is this rendering of, content over headphones. And basically, it's a synthesis. And what it does is all the sources that are arbitrary positioned around me are getting synthesized for a sensory experience of a front, a back, a left, all this. It is a 2-channel delivery, by the way. You can send this. I'm sending this to you on YouTube. There's nothing specific. It's 2 channels, but when you're listening to them, you're already getting a different experience, okay? It's not compatible on stereo speaker, by the way, so you may be getting some weird things at home if you're on stereo speakers. You still get the left, right, but if you're listening to it, there's probably some, some timbre effect for sure on it. But there's a system for this called transoral, which actually you're going to see right there. We can create transoral content for people that are interested by transcoding binaural room. Little scheme that you see on the right side there, it's basically a transcode, the binaural to a transcode to a transoral system for 2 speakers. But then, binaural means, that we can basically create binaural content, and you can actually sum some binaural content that you're receiving with some freshly created content as well. If you've got some binaural scene and that you want to kind of add some elements to, you can rapidly do this with Spat as well for the one who's interested with binaural content. And that's the scheme that you see on the left side. We talk about binaural, we've got to talk about ed-related transfer function. I think our friends from Genelec are online. Let me say hello to them. And why am I saying hello to Genelec? Not because I've got 2 Genelecs behind me, but strictly because we've been exploring recently a system called Oral ID, which is a possibility for you from home to actually get your own HRTFs. And yeah, getting a personal HRTF is very interesting if you're going to be mixing in binaural. If that's going to be part of your gig of mixing immersive content, definitely consider getting a personal HRTF. Which can be done in some labs all over the planet. They're not that easy to find, but some solutions are coming, to do something with filming your ears, and this is what Oral ID is. Not wanting to do some advertising necessarily, but this is great. This is great, and we've been playing. I know our lead developer Gal, which is online. Hey Gal, got his personalized HRTF from the same mechanism with interesting results. Anyway, what's important to understand is the question came up earlier, KMR, right? By default, KMR is this dummy ed, the base filter for binaural, which in theory should render good result for the majority of the planet, in theory. But the truth of the matter is it's not the case, and it's probably a percentage of 60% that will get some feeling, and some people will be left off. With, I'm not picking up the back, I'm not picking up the elevation. And this is what the HRTF does, okay? It's basically, the math, the model for the filtering. And these are basically just based on, your ears, your torso, they're basically, the physical elements of your body, obviously, and your ears, height and stuff, that have an impact on the way we listen to audio every day without headphones when we're walking in a room. So this is what that does. Anyway, yeah. So that's a little parenthesis on binaural and HRTFs. We can import HRTF SOFA files straight in Spat when we get into the preferences later anyway. Quick parenthesis on ambisonic or B format, first order ambisonic or higher order ambisonic. There's 2 things that we do here. We can either create streams in ambisonic or we can transcode. What I mean by transcode, you're getting an ambisonic 3rd order, something from a collaborator, you can transcode this onto a speaker arrangement to listen to, or more maybe to spatialize it. You can transcode, from a 3rd order to a cube channel arrangement that you can sit on a, we're not going to cover this today, advanced session, just want to kind of briefly talk about transcoding that we offer for ambisonic and people working in ambisonic. Very interesting because ambisonic is a great delivery method that's not stuck to a channel base, right? It's a sound field, up to 64 channels if you're on the 7th order. So you're not attaching this to a channel-based arrangement. Great way to deliver, but there's challenges in transcoding it to be aware of. But anyway, we have some shows that are being done, quick parenthesis, we actually have done a show in Berlin, for that matter of fact. I saw some people from Berlin, Munich, whatever. Definitely some people from Berlin out there. The show Vivid in Berlin is exactly this. Made by our friends, programmed, partially programmed by Sfereo, a consultant we've been working with. They basically did, with the sound designer, which I sorry don't have the name here, created a 5th order ambisonic bed for the music and a 5th order ambisonic bed for the vocals. And these were transcoded into a speaker arrangement of 50-something speakers. And interestingly enough, was transcoded to a 4.1 arrangement for VIP booths in the theater. An example of how Spat can be versatile for some workflows anyway. So ambisonic was the choice for there. Moving on to spatialization technologies and understanding that we are here dealing with amplitude, intensity-based panning, often the vector-based and or distance-based in the case of DBAP. And what I want everyone to understand is this concept of sweet spot centric. And now let's just make a quick parenthesis. The sweet spot centric approach doesn't mean that only one guy in the venue for a live sound scenario or in a live sound arrangement will actually going to pick this up. I mean, depending on the speaker arrangement, design, and live scenario, the VBAP, the traditional sweet spot, can render a fairly big sweet spot zone, and depending where the speaker is located, can deliver proper to an audience, like larger audience zones. It's not just one ed, just to make a quick parenthesis, but people that have been in 5.1 and in surround and multi-channel for years know about the sweet spot, right? You're all equidistant to a bunch of speakers surrounding you, right? So we're going to talk about this. We have other panning methods for this. We've got KNN, which is not necessarily a panning method, but a tool that I was using in the Circ. We've got DBAP that can be used, and eventually wave-field synthesis anyway. That can be used, okay? So these are the various techniques. Let's just jump to the Spat computer quickly. I'm going to be, I'm going to be getting to the setup page here. You may have already added a room in your Spat at home if you are in front of a Spat, and when you're touching on a room, you're seeing a little inspector on the side, and it gives me the ability to name the room. You see your Atmos, but it has right there the stream type. So you basically choose, and I can on the fly basically change this Atmos bed to an high order ambisonic, all the way to fourth order, and that was done. I did not affect any of the source parameters. I've just changed the stream outputs to an ambisonic format, which obviously I can't listen to right now. It's ambisonic, needs to be transcoded. I want to get you the concept of changing, stream type on the fly. I got obviously the channel base, and channel base is any speaker arrangement, and we're going to talk about this right away. So you see binaural, mid-side, and B format. Right below this, when you're in channel base, is speaker arrangement. And mind my long list here. Actually, my face is on the top of the list, but that's fine. Leave it there. Mind my long list of speaker arrangements. But a bunch of them are custom. But at the base, Spat delivers with all the speaker arrangement in the world you can imagine, from a mono to a 1.1 stereo, and the list goes on and on and on. 5.1, various Atmos arrangements, 7.1, 5.1.4, name them. They're all there, and if they're not, you have the rights to actually send a message of support, and we're actually going to get it created if we forgot one. But we try to make as many as possible available. You'll see some actually that from the Montreal SAT. I think it's actually part of the Berlin Planetarium. Some of them actually made it to the default, and these are predefined arrangement that we deliver to you. They're all normalized, that 2-meter conversation, which we'll pick up a bit. Okay, so these are the actual speaker arrangement per se that you can as well, like changing the stream type, change on the fly. And last but not least is, and I'm on the mono, so there's no panning here. Let me just pick up the Atmos again, Dolby Atmos 7, okay. And you see when you have a multi-speaker arrangement, the next question that pops up is, what's the panning type? And let's talk about, we're gonna be talking about 2 of them. You see here, you see VBAP, VBIP, DBAP, KNN, AEP, which stands for amplitude, ambisonic equivalent panning. So these are, yes, I'm not looking at the camera again to have the message. I know that. Hello, I'm still there. You should put the camera right in front of me, where I looked all the time. So what was I saying? Yeah, so these panning methods, which we'll talk, a bit about, they're right there, by the way, for you. And obviously, if you are on a smaller, like a stereo setup, you will see as well, panning types such as stereo pan, XY, AB appear. That should not be there on other. Let's see. My guy's moving the camera. It's like, okay, Hugo, you're just not following my instructions to watching the camera. So he's moving the camera. That's it. That's how our life goes. Hello, thank you. Probably be better there. Thank you. So anyway, so stereo pan, angular panning, and you'll see in my slides actually the angular panning and the panning curve. And the curve is actually very similar to what we are here, which is called the VBAP, which stands for vector-based amplitude panning anyway. Let's jump back to the actual slideshow. Et voilà. Okay, so angular, as I was just talking about, pairwise panning in 2D. But as soon as you've got a 3D, arrangement, we'll talk about these vector-based VBAP or VBIP, very similar, by the way. VBIP seems to render better in higher frequencies anyway, above 700 hertz. But these are the two vector-based panning that we have. We have the distance-based and KNN speaker placement, correction, amplitude panning. I think this one we actually don't offer anymore, I'm not sure. And last but not least, the AEP. Okay, let's talk about these panning techniques briefly because they're important to understand. And VBAP is basically an extension of what stereo amplitude is all about, just applied to more speakers, really, We'll actually have some little images for you in 2 seconds. And the panning law is basically, the two closest speakers to the source, or 3 if you're in 3D. So the deal is 2 speakers active all the time, or 3 speaker active all the time. If you are in 2D versus in 3D using VBAP or VBIP. Again, we've talked about this. You're basically surrounding the listener, in a 2D ring of speakers or in a 3-dimensional sphere, half sphere, NHK, it looks like that pretty much, or in an Atmos arrangement, right? And we always assume that the listener are, located in the center. That's where you're getting the effect of an equidistant setup. Yay, and we got a new camera spot here because I always look there. You decided to move the camera there. I love it. Pleasure of live. Thanks, Guy. Yes, you can see it on the screen here on a typical, ring or a typical 2D plane, top view, right? Speaker 1, speaker 2, and that virtual speaker, that's the source basically, that's moving, giving you the impression of a speaker. And that's how the vector, gets calculated. The calculation for the vector happens for these two outputs. And we see that we're moving to 3D here. We're actually got triangulation. We've got these active triangles. That's why we're going to talk about spheres. That's why we're going to talk about the importance of having these triangles when we're doing a speaker arrangement and a custom arrangement anyway, to be able to localize, and this is that triangulation that comes from the 3D aspect, okay? Making sense, we see a little sphere here and a little, the vector summation that you see on the little top there, maybe you see that. Anyway, and that's how, sphere system makes a lot of sense. And, to that extent, I may cover the fact that, you're thinking about a 5.1. 5.1 was the reason those two rears are actually there. It's probably because they make sense for someone in the living room but you have to agree that the sides, there's a big hole in the sides. It's an irregular system, which will obviously going to render, never render as great as having, equidistance and a uniform system, which we obviously try to promote as much as possible, when possible. Sometimes we make compromises. Yes, let's look at that curve. You see red and the blue. That's the one I want you to focus on. The difference basically there is we've got we're looking at angular versus VBAP pan. So it's pretty much the same thing as the typical angular panning that you're used to, I guess. Yeah, and then obviously the sweet spot centric may not always work. And why wouldn't it work? Well, it would not work if, for example, if your system is irregular, for example, right? Think about a museum where you've got, 200 feet, or sorry, I'm in feet now, back to Canada here. If you've got a corridor of, 40 meters, 50 meter long, and you've got some speakers, in that system, and they're spread out in an irregular way, and your audience is sitting pretty much anywhere, VBAP will not work, right? You'll basically have only if you're in 2D, you'll only have 2 speakers active. So, so distance-based is basically an alternate method for that. And it's a matrix base, and supporting, these other type of system. It's not making any assumptions on where the listener is sitting, or when it's situated. And basically, there's no link to the listener per se. Everything is in relationship. Sorry for that. Everything is in relationship with the source and the quantity of speakers. There's basically a weighting that happens based on the distance of a source to the closest speaker and all the other speakers, for that matter of fact. And this is how the panning happens. So VBAP is very interesting, doing a very wide stage, and you want to do some localization without kind of, sorry for that, why is it keeping doing this? Without compromising the fact that you need to distribute some signals. So there's the matrix, there's the amplitude, weighting that comes very handy for you, okay? This is our DBAP in 2D and in 3D. And last but not least, KNN. I want to briefly talk about KNN, which is more for our live folks out there, although it's a creative tool. KNN is not an amplitude panning. It does basically do some amplitude panning, but over a number of defined speakers. You get to define how many speakers, and that's defined by percentage. You may have seen it later. You guys, actually, we can jump here quick if we want to do this full. Let's just move to KNN. Let's just move to my main screen, Guy, please. We'll move back to my main screen. I'm just going to show you a parameter that's going to appear on the source called the percentage. If we actually pick up a source, you see where the spreading is. I actually have a percentage neighborhood, and the percentage neighborhood will allow you to define is that amplitude distribution or amplitude panning gets done over all the speakers or only one speakers. And that was why earlier when I was doing the preview in KNN, you were hearing a sound jump. It was basically jumping. There was no panning per se. It was jumping from one speaker to the other in your ears, okay? And that it can be very practical. You want to localize something that's not moving. You want it to come out of one speaker, or it's object kind of linked almost to the speaker without panning per se. And you can start to increase, fully automate this and increase the percentage. Kind of get where I'm going with the KNN. Something that we use intensively in these kind of setups, a theatrical show. It's really a creative tool. And you can move the source around. You'll hear it jump like a strobe, as an effect if you wanted to. Everything is automated anyway, so yeah, good. Okay, I think we've covered some of the panning methods. Let's just look at these channel-based arrangements. You've seen them mono stereo. We've talked about them already anyway. But any custom speakeration applies. And let's take some time. A friend of mine, sent me a message yesterday. Say, Hugo, I wish we had spent a bit more time on custom speaker arrangements. And we'll take a bit of time to talk about them in the next section. Because obviously you can create pretty much anything you want in 2D and 3D, and there's a few things to kind of follow when you're doing those. This is the window. If we jump back to Spat, you actually saw this room output as well, and this is where we're going to be able to edit this actual speaker arrangement. If we actually go, briefly in Spat again, Guy, we're going to be able to see, right next to the speaker arrangement, when you're looking at the inspector here, right, there's a little edit button. That's what basically populates you, this window where you can choose speaker arrangement, you can duplicate them, you can export, import them. There's a bunch of functionality. We'll try to cover them a bit. Time flies as usual anyway. Okay, let's move on to the PowerPoint quick. And we're actually going to be moving into module 2 where we're actually going to look at custom speaker configuration anyway. We could even start with that, for that matter of fact. Okay, questions? How are we doing on time? Are we doing better? We're doing pretty much the same thing as yesterday. Okay. Enrique, how do you design in Spat Revolution when you are at home or home studio without the correct speaker setup? Let's say no the minimal. I'm not trying to understand. Not the minimal 5.1 setup. Well, there's no necessarily minimal. There's not necessarily a minimal, per se speaker arrangement for you to monitor. Obviously, it would be ideal for you to have an NHK22 do a lot of resolution, be able to listen to pretty much anything, transcoding a 64, non-bosonic 7 order all the way to playing with binaural and stuff. So yes, indeed, at one point, if you have no elevation or limited elevation, but a 514 setup has been recognized by some people as a good bass. You're basically, it's the 5.1 that we know, and we're adding some elevation, the 4 elevation. I think that's something that Dolby Atmos Live is talking about right now for the, time of a live broadcast. I was listening to some of their live webinars yesterday on this. But yeah, there's no per se one way. And the fact that you have a lot of flexibility, you can listen to it in your 5.1 system and 5.1.4 and take the binaural maybe to get better ideas. But I hope I'm answering the question. Charles, do the circles in the room relate to a specific distance? Indeed. The circle, yes, we can jump there. And maybe jump back to the Spat, please. And you see we're in the KNN room. I'm going to start there because you see there's no circle in it. And there's a reason the KNN and the DBAP, for that matter of fact, have no circle. You see there are only squares right now, and there's no listening head as well. And the reason we do this, for people to understand that you're no longer in a sweet spot-centric approach. You're in a matrix. You're on a grid. You're off the grid or whatever. You're off the circle, the polar patterns. But let's go back now to Atmos. Yes, they do indeed. And this is your listening head, 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meters, and then 5, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is what's going on. So you're right. The lines, the circles relate to specific distances. And as you see, here we are on I changed it to stereo. Here we're on a stereo arrangement, 2 speakers. They're sitting at a 2 meter line, 1, 2. So is all the sources, mono sources, stereo source, they all default to 2 meter distance. You see in there, 2 meter distance, 2 meter radius. Speaker arrangement normalized at 2 meter, everything's at 2 meter. That's the line, and that's where, when you're starting to move a source, from that line, this is where the drop happens, right? And the drop is not related to the VBAP at all. VBAP cares only about, for example, in VBAP anyway, cares about the angles. If we're actually bringing this source inside, and just to talk about the radius on the question, if we're bringing the source inside and we're moving it here, you know what's going to happen? Basically nothing as far as level goes. What's going to happen though is you're going to get the panning. So panning still applies, and you'll get outside of the 2 speakers, but no level change until you start to actually bring the signal there. We could use another example. If I'm actually picking up another speaker arrangement here. Let's take something not normalized. Is that normalized? Yeah, you see that's not normalized. So you see right now, like these speakers, the outside speakers are way more than 2 meters. Because I did not normalize, this custom arrangement is not normalized, obviously what's going to happen is that if you bring a source, if you have a source that's actually on the speaker line, well, it's actually, getting quite a bit of a signal drop, right? Their radius. Typically, we increase the radius of the speaker line. That's a practice that we do. But again, custom speaker configuration, more for complex scenarios anyway. Okay, hope I answered the question here. Do you think it is good to mix to mix 2 or more sets of room with different kind of panning type together into the same speaker output? Yeah. For sure. And we can actually do this very rapidly. Okay, I can close this session here, get send return. If I do this, I see my live input. I can actually going to do 2 rooms. Let's just choose. I mean, obviously it depends in which application, but it can be good, obviously, if the sweet spot centric works for some elements and not for other, you can. If you've got actually, for that matter of fact, let's just take a speaker arrangement of whatever. I take Dolby. We like Dolby. Don't we? 712, where was it? There it is. We've got 2 rooms now, and look at what we can actually do, and we'll get to talk about this here. I'm connecting 2 rooms into a single output. This is the beauty of the summing. Summing happens in the sum modules that we have, but it actually happens on any module, any master module. When you're bringing 2 sources based on the name, left channel, right channel, the naming convention will sum this into a single stream. And then obviously I can choose here one panning type, the other one's another panning type, and so on and so forth. So 2 panning types, and maybe some sources are hitting. That would be the same concept that I've talked about earlier of saying, hey, I've got a source, that's going to the long reverb room, and the other one, these sources are going to the dry room, right? So you're going to be connecting, sources to different, but at the end, you're getting out a single stream, right? You don't need to go outside in loudspeaker management and manage all these things. You can sum it back to a single stream. Only on bigger complex systems like at Circus, we're talking where a channel, a Spat channel, can mean at Circus, theatrical production, but the example I was showing, one channel actually can mean, is distributed to many speakers that are representing the left for various people. Okay. Is that the question? Do you think it is good to mix the 2? Yeah, that's the same question. I think, I hope I answered those questions. Good. Yes? How are we doing, guys? Are we doing not too bad? I think I'm doing a bit better on the timing than yesterday. Anyway, no? As bad? Worst? Equal? Oh, yeah? Okay. Yes? Okay, someone says yes anyway. How big is our crowd? How big is our crowd? I need to take a break. I need to take a bit of water, maybe. Huh? 150. 150 live. Yeah, you know what? We're constant with yesterday anyway. We're very constant with yesterday as far as the crowd. That's great. It's very good. Excellent. 150. Someone's writing live. Good stuff. Okay. Where are we at now? We're done with the questions. And we're going to be talking about deploying this baby. We're about 20 minutes left to the 2-hour promise session. We're going to go above it. because I like to be, illegal a bit and not follow the instructions. No, I've got a lot of things to say. We're fine-tuning this. The first time we delivered this training, there's a lot of content, and we ate to skip things at the same time. We will be skipping some as we get towards the module 4, which get more specific to applications, and we are planning another series, of advanced session, deeper into production, deeper into live, for example, because we definitely know, and we don't want to, basically have a bunch of music people that care about, Atmos production and with some complex live systems anyway. So we're going to keep it to some, to the most generic anyway concepts. So let's actually talk about deploying this Spat software. We'll look at configuration. We're going to create stuff. We're going to connect blocks together. So, follow me here. Basically, we have this application that's running on Mac and PC computer. You probably have figured that out already because you're most probably running it on your computer. No Linux build today yet, right? Lead engineer, Gal, someone in the team, yeah? Linux build maybe eventually? Yeah, we've been joking about it, yeah. We'll eventually get, maybe some Linux builds going on there. We're basically using the multi-core of your computer, today's computer, to process all these source objects, parameters, the spatialization, the reverb engine. So we're doing quite a bit with those. It does mean that we have to have some sort of a minimum. You don't want to be doing this, on any necessarily machine, and like any, things that we're trying to do in the studio, you're probably not going to try to kill Dropbox, kill the Wi-Fi, and you kind of keep these things in mind, and on top of it, you may be running Pro Tools and Spat at the same time, which are, I could say, two applications are not necessarily light anyway. Spat is not for sure. Obviously, some other DAW are actually lighter than other. But yeah, the computer capacity is very important. The I/O capacity, the session size, and the latency is really limited by the hardware. We've covered it on the latency anyway. For typical DAW integration, we typically recommend 1024 anyway. And you'll see that we want to have the 1024 on the Pro Tools and on Spat for synchronization. And you'll get the message if you're not at the same latency as the DAW anyway in the bottom left. And then we have so we obviously have the integration to DAW, but as we have integration in real time, and real time can mean a studio as well. In some studio, larger production broadcaster, they definitely won't run the Pro Tools and the Spat on the same computer. So obviously Pro Tools can be running on a computer. MADI I/O being fed to one or two MADI Spat, MADI Spat I would call it, or Dante Spat, or AVB Spat, or AES67 Spat. In a control room processing live. And in this case, there's no local I/O connection, but all the automation can still flow from the DAW. And which is the same scenario that we're doing in touring and live sound, for that matter of fact, right? We're getting audio in from a MADI feed, a MADI audio interface, a wave sound grid interface, name them. And it could be obviously network audio, which is great today, a large I/O count of Dante inputs, AVB audio. This is, things that you can do, like, for example, in some systems as well. Gives us a lot of flexibility. And last but not least, obviously, the integration of the DAW, as we were talking. Important to understand, well, number one, that that plugin runs in multiple formats: AAX native, AU and VST, which covers pretty much all. More coming on that for that matter of fact. And we are doing DSP, so we're doing SXL Avid version. This is what's running on that console here. The plugin runs on the console. It means that you can actually move. There's a series of Spat webinars on this that you may be able to watch, where basically all these source parameters are on the channel, on the console, and you can build this in the snapshots, and fire some movements of sources in the Spat engine. That's what we were doing in the Closed Talker show, and on many of those shows with live sound, with SXL, for example. But what's important to understand is the plugin runs in kind of two modes. Local brings audio and automation between the two applications, the DAW. And if you're actually remote, the plugin is still very practical because it will be sending OSC command to one or two computer. Thinking about a studio production, larger studio that wants to have a main and backup processing computer in the room for larger session. Yeah, the OSC, the parameters, the automation parameters that you wrote on the Pro Tools, it's actually can go to one or potentially two computers, main and backup, okay? So this is the concept of kind of deporting, a system from local to network base. Question. Sorry, let's talk about requirement briefly. Basically, my rule of thumb is as follows. If you are on a generic computer, fairly powerful machine, but a single machine, but fairly generic, meaning that you have, for example, I don't know, I would say, a quad core, Intel i5, and 8 or 16 gig of RAM. You definitely want to make sure, potentially that you have a dedicated graphic card. We are graphic heavy. As you saw the room that I'm spinning, it's a 3D engine, right? So we do want to make sure you're taking some time to think here. And at the end of the day, the other thing that I like to talk about, if you don't have this, it's fine. We've been doing it, but keep in mind there'll be some limitations for our session size. The Mac Minis are an example of that. But I was getting out, 32 channel at 96K with doing 2 rooms and with the reverb engine, in a live scenario. But that would be kind of the limit. So that's like what I like to talk about. These machines that are, have some limitation. You want to keep it to USB and Thunderbolt interfaces. Why? Because network audio, Dante, AVB, AES6 will take some resources on the core. Definitely you want to avoid that for the smaller setup. And then, you're typically going to keep your channel count, your sources, the 64 mono, 32 stereo at 48K. Obviously, if you're going 96, you'll be wanting to drop that potentially. 2, 3 virtual rooms, and you'll pretty much leave it at there. Kind of as a recommendation, we do have a consulting group, the Flux Immersive Consulting Group, that's been involved on larger deployment, making recommendation, actually working with hardware integrator as well for our touring applications or, But I say touring, live sound, or anything that you want to beefy your machine. Obviously, some of the latest Mac Pro. I haven't got my Mac Pro yet. I'm waiting. Hey, boss, is there a boss somewhere, someone in front that can ship me a Mac Pro so I can test this beast? But yeah, obviously, some of those big beasts will render quite amazing results. But we haven't tested them yet, for that matter of fact. We've done on the older Mac Pro with great results. Although, yeah. Voila. Okay. I keep clicking on this wrong place. So, okay, let's talk about the application and the preferences on this application, the core and the ASIO aspect from local to network system and the block size and how they are important. So let's jump into my computer here, and we'll actually look at how to set up OSC briefly. The OSC is not required as a setup when you're doing the Spat plugin. The OSC is really if you're in a network scenario where you have multiple computers, playback separated, you're doing an audio, MADI routing or other audio method routing, you're not using the plugin to route the audio, number one. Or number two, OSC would get used. Well, that's what I was using my QLab. We can do OSC integration locally with something that we call loopback. That's just a standard computer thing. So that's how you saw my QLab firing some movement. So maybe you haven't seen it, but I could do it right now for that matter of fact. Okay, let's move into my Spat computer. For the sake of it, let's just remove everything. Boom, we are done. Actually, we can close this session, get send return, IC1 Spat send. It's a stereo instance. Why is this? I am running, QLab like I was running before. This is my little Q sheet or Q cart, I would say. And we're using the an AU format plugin on the Q output of Spat to QLab to actually speak to me. And that's why, I was getting some audio, by the way. So let's start to build a session. Let's start to deal with this baby here. Let's go to the preference page, top right. I want to show you 2 sections. Number 1, hardware I/O. I am currently using an Army Digiface AVB audio interface, a 128 channel AVB 96K, up to 96K device. 64 channel limited by software though. Great interface that I'm actually using to actually play to you guys. So this is my device. You obviously have all your core audio or ASIO devices available to you. Sample rate here can manually be changed, but if you have the external sample rate enabled button, it's going to follow. It's going to basically follow the sample rate of the device. Okay, simple as this. Block size. Right now, I'm at 1024. Why is this? Because 1024 is what I have in QLab, and this is what I have in Pro Tools, and this is something that we want to see on both sides when we're doing local input. And that's it, that's all. Now, obviously, this device here, the audio device, would be practical to bring in analog audio, to bring local audio, hardware input, we call it. In the case of software, like we're doing here, we actually not really, that aspect doesn't matter really, what does matter here is only the block size. And you'll get an error message if you've got it wrong. See on the bottom, you can see on the bottom in red, 1024, sample mismatch. There's a mismatch. I'm on a block size of 512. So yeah, so that's the hardware aspect. I'm not going to go through all of the aspect of the preferences. You can figure it out yourself. The second one I want to show you about is the OSC connections. You can see here on the bottom, OSC main. Basically, by default, it will be disabled. By activating it, you're activating 6 slots. They can be inputs or outputs going to local network or to going to local network or complete network system of devices to actually send some messages. Right now what I'm seeing is I've actually chose the input mode for my first slots. I've got a bunch of IP addresses here. I chose the first one, LO0, by the way. That's called loopback I was talking about. This is basically an ability for me to send between QLab and Spat some OSC commands. Yes, and that's a specific thing to OSC generic, really. Something that you guys don't need to do if you have a software. If you have, the DAW integrated. But if you wanted, for example, to integrate a Lemur iPad controller, by the way, we're coming out with some Lemur templates to have a little, controller for your sources, for you to control, some of the movements on an iPad, for example. You would be actually doing exactly this. The IP address would be different. You would be coming from a network, your router, your wireless router, or your studio network. But in this case here, actually, we're doing this for local. Port number are important. Basically, the output of one thing needs to speak to the input of the other thing with the same port number. Important to set whenever we're dealing with OSC. Not the plan for today anyway. And here I'm basically telling the software, activate the source information. I'm reading source information. And this is why when I'm actually, oops, sorry for that. This is why when I'm actually firing QLab, I can actually move the source. Now, Hugo, what did you just do here? Why is that everything connected? Well, there's some great things, in life, such as, you've got an input, you go and you choose an output block, and the famous command, Command A, will do a selection of all my module, and Command L does a connection. And it automatically creates a source. It was a stereo input. It creates a stereo source. It puts it by default in a stereo room, and it goes to a stereo master that goes to a stereo output, the physical output. So really, I'm ready to start at this point. I basically, and if that output was already there because of the DAW, right? Remember when we have the DAW, it shows the inputs and the output, the spat send return. So if it was already there, I would have actually basically done my connection from bottom to end in 1 second. I can then click the room and start to do the modifications. Let's talk about what I wanted to talk here is, yes, why is that source moving when I'm firing a circle azimuth of 15 seconds? This is because my QLab is sending the commands, an OSC command that says, hey, source number 1, can you please rotate on the azimuth for 15 seconds, please go. And says go on for muting the source, muting the source, changing the gain to -n, resetting the gain, whatever you want to make it, right? Hey, now we're listening to it in stereo, by the way. We can change this on the fly to binaural, can we? Let's see. Yep. And now you're feeling more the room as well. And we're on a KMR. We could go on 1040. On 1040 HRTF. We've talked about HRTF here. So back to this circle. So you get the concept. Thanks to OSC, that was set right here for us, getting an input. These HRTF are manageable here. I'm not going to get into this today. And the other setting we'll avoid for now, tracking, integration, and stuff. Okay, let's go back into our modules right now. Oh, okay, we're not question period already. Oh, let me talk, to these guys. What are you saying? Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell. Yeah, the famous thing. Yeah, hit the bell. This channel here that we've been, very active on creating tutorial. We're doing this live sound training, session today. We're actually going to be delivering more of that, more market-specific, application-specific. We've got more tutorials coming. Just a reminder to hit the bell. And we'll be creating a Facebook group. I don't know if it's created. Maybe it's already created. There's a new Facebook group that's coming as well to build a community around the Spat Revolution software and the immersive conversation. Some of our Flux Immersive consulting group people and the team around us of engineers, will be kind of, collaborating to this. By the way, if you've got questions, things that you want to talk about, or post your success stories and have the community help each other in some ways, in deploying some systems, even exchanging templates, sessions, for example. Okay, yeah, a little parenthesis, we can do 64 sample buffer, Reaper, for example. That's got to be Jean-Loup that wrote this. Jean-Loup, is it you? Jean-Loup, the father of something called Reaper Evolution, which we're not going to show you today. It's going to come so shortly. Or it's maybe going to come eventually anyway. We're working on some simplified way to integrate very complex scenario with Reaper. For example, okay, Reaper can do 64 channel buffer. It's only a Pro Tools thing. Okay, thank you. Whatever. Important both on both sides to have the same buffer. And yes, you can go lower than 1024 in Pro Tools as well. It's just that we have been getting better success. Was it you? This was from Gael indeed. You see, if it's not Jean-Louis, it's our lead developer that's talking about Reaper. Love you, Gael. Okay, 1024, okay, thank you. More questions there? No, okay, we can go on. Let's actually talk about these blocks. Let's talk about these blocks, tips and tricks. I've already started to show you tips and tricks, right? Put an input, put an output, connect, you know, Command A, Command L, everything is connected. In a second, we'll look at these modules and what they do, and connecting them and the matrix. We've actually done some of it already, but let's just explore them more. You know, you figure out, if you go top to bottom, quite easy. Inputs, the physical input. If you're adding one here, it's a hardware input by default. You know, software input get automatically generated by opening the DAW. By the way, open your DAW first, right? Actually, you know what? Because we didn't get the time to do this, let me actually kill QLab for now. Let's do that. And you see, it became red. Why it became red? Basically, it disappeared. And if I'm removing, you know, this block here, and if I go cat send return, it's no longer there. The application closed it. It disappeared. We're happy. We're happy. Now we're only basically getting an hardware input here. But what I want to do, I'm actually going to fire Pro Tools again. I'll get you another session, something that we didn't get to play. You might have seen. Thank you, USB-C adapter. It's been doing this with me for the last 2 days. Thank you. Just plug, unplug, whatever. Too many USB devices. You know, the pleasure of studio, pleasure of iLox, we could say. Let me actually go briefly open a session. We didn't get to do it today. You may have actually, at the beginning, if you were there 5 minutes before we started the broadcast, you heard the story of Akagera. Jazz band, yes, jazz can do immersive. This whole idea was put more speakers, you know, in a show, small venues, you know, for that matter of fact, not necessarily complex, just add speakers, use the power of the acoustic simulation and the object-based mixing in Spat to actually deliver some shows. And I'm actually going to open this session. I haven't actually tried it. You see maybe some interesting things. Find links. Everything seems there. Spat sends are there, and they're not activated on purpose. Great. So you see, so these Spat sends are in the actual sources right now. We're not showing you a complex routing, multiple thing. I just want to show you tracks, Spat send with the disadvantage of pre-fader, as we've talked about in the case of Pro Tools anyway, but we don't really care because actually we have gain in Spat. You could do your automation on the Spat, on the Spat gain if you wanted to, you know, now that's if you're ready to, you know, change your typical habits anyway. But, you know, so if I actually activate this, you'll see what's going to happen there. And if I remember the command, yes, if I hit control and enable, all my sources are enabled. One shot, right? Easy. So, you know, and how was that done? That was basically, you know, just us adding the, you know, adding an insert into the track itself. And in this case, we use the Spat Revolution send. Further returns, we insert the Spat Revolution return, you know, and I'm not going to do this now. I just basically want to show you how quick that we're connecting things together and have actually some live input. So let's kill that first hardware input that I add. Here I have all my sources, simple thing, you know, 6 tracks. It's a live thing. I'm going to remove this. I'm actually going to just remove everything. So by the way, you know, the lasso, grab everything, remove selected. So you see command delete, or, you know, you can use the inspector. You can remove the selected one, or you can connect the selected one, which is the command L. Okay, yes, we want this to be gone. So here we have, you know, our sources. Input transcode, let's not take too much about them. It's basically us transcoding ambisonic to a channel base. If you put this, you can connect and have a transcode. Advanced sessions for sure. Let's not talk about this now. This is the transcode. Sources, we can add them manually, but for that matter of fact, it gets created automatically, so we don't need to bother. In some cases, we could, you know, feed the same input to 2 sources that's hitting 2 rooms for more complex setup. So we could manually add a source and patch multiple, or add 2 sources and patch the same input into both. We're not going to do this now. So sources, room, well, we can actually add that room if you know, but as I showed you, there's a little trick, you know, before, you know, which is the command L and command A, command L that does all the connections. So we'll do this at the end. So rooms are rooms, unlimited number, limited by computer for sure. And then we have a sum module that does the summation. So basically, and on the naming, so left, left, right, right, whatever, surround left, surround right, it's going to sum these together to create a unique output. But for that matter of fact, we actually can do this on master modules as well. So summation is still practical for some scenario, but we have this on master modules as well. In between the sum and the master is the master transcoder, and that transcodes what? That transcodes binaural to transaural, that transcodes ambisonic to channel bass. You want to listen to a 7th order sound field, you know, and you want to listen to it on an NHK 22.2, you can be able to transcode, and then you get all the transcoding options. Advanced stuff anyway, but the master transcoded there for that. The master is just a master. The master is an in and an out and a volume and something you can automate, really. Then below that, the binaural monitoring. Important to understand, binaural monitoring does not have any, basically do one thing, which is tapping wherever you want. And we'll add it after I do this, okay? It's gonna tap, and basically, instead of doing a binaural stream, right? I put a binaural room, I've got sources and a binaural room, and we're basically gonna get a synthesis, and all the sources will be, you know, get localized, you'll get the binaural synthesis happening. The preview is you doing this not on the sources as objects, but as the speakers, the objects, right? That's basically, you're synthesizing the speaker output, right? 2 speakers, 8 speakers, 20, 50, 100 speakers. This is how at home you're listening to a binaural NHK 22.2 like we were doing. That's a binaural preview, we call it binaural monitoring for that matter of fact, which is quite practical. And last is the output. I'm gonna add an output, manually this time. The output is the physical one. By default, it's an hardware. We'll leave it at hardware, and I'm outputting on, it's mono right now. I'm going to patch it later on. So let's just do this. You know, Command A, Command L. Everything is connected. I want to deliver to you a binaural. I'm going to go in the room and go in the remember on the little, I'm going to say it. Yes, the inspector, if you want, and choose the stream type binaural. You see the color change as well to tell you you're in binaural on the master, binaural on the output, and I'm outputting on channel 1 and 2. That should be actually going out to you if I do this, and I play the session, and it doesn't. Why it's this? Because, yes, maybe, maybe not. Oh, yeah. Okay. It's a live show. We're live. Okay, in binaural, we're going to name this the binaural for that matter of fact, if we want. Binaural. Here we are. Sources are all there. You know, we're actually going to start manipulating the source. We can actually color code them if we wanted to have all the drums. You know, multi-select, so shift. I chose 3 sources. Generate a color. It can be a manual color, but I can set the color. I want my drums in green, right? If you want to follow a color scheme that you've got going on in your Pro Tools or whatever template, right? And if I, right? Kind of getting the concept of what we've got going here. It took 2 seconds, right? I've added an actual block at the output, connected all. It's already patched. Now I'm doing something illegal, guy, not to do it at home. Yeah, you can do it at home if you want, to your own risk, which is basically coming in software, going out hardware. It's not officially qualified for a synchronization perspective. It has rendered good results, for that matter of fact, interestingly enough. So I'm actually coming software input, but I'm going out straight on hardware, by the way. Oh, and when you're in hardware, it means a matrix. Let's just talk about it. This is my 128 channel AVB interfaces. I've got, you know, 2 channels, the left, right, going out on 1 and 2. Okay, and that's for you listening to this live feed. Making sense? But yeah, typically you will be returning. You're going to be using, and we could do it because, you know, let me show you how to do things. If we create a new bus, a stereo bus, you know, and we call it binaural, and we create it, and we can insert a multi-channel sound field spat return. And if I activate it, what's going to happen? You see, my stereo return is actually there. That would be the proper way to do it. Connect that binaural to the stereo return, which is coming back to the DAW, which is waiting what? I can bounce it, right? I can bounce it. Okay, so this is explaining pretty much all the module that we've got. We're going to be taking questions. Uh-oh, the question 8D that's coming up. Love it. Connecting. So just go back to the slideshow quickly. Make sure I'm following something. We're actually on the 2 hour. We started at 12:05 or 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're on the 2 hour. We're not bad. I think I'm doing better than yesterday. I actually, you know, made sure to cover things that I kind of didn't get to yesterday. And I did promise to do the speaker configuration, so we will do that actually briefly as we are in the processing blocks anyway. So the modular setup, the module functionality, what they do, we've looked at that, the various processing blocks, and basically the tips and tricks and how we connect all these together. Hopefully, if you have questions, we can keep talking about. We can keep talking about this, and configuring the speaker arrangement is coming up for you guys before we take questions anyway on this module. And let's just talk about it. So, as we said earlier, speaker arrangement. When you are in channel base, and now I don't have any options in the inspector because I'm not in channel base. If I go to a channel base and I go to the stereo, right? You go understand that we're now on the stereo. And if I'm playing this session, I'm actually on the stereo output now, back to you guys, okay? So we get that. But what I want to talk about is all these speaker arrangement now, they're fixed. You can't duplicate, you can't edit them. If you press on the edit on that left, right, I can't change any parameters. If you select them, you can actually, so the edit button I've pressed, sorry if I went fast, on the actual speaker arrangement, or speaker config we call it. So the stereo can't be edited. I can't change the position. A stereo is -30 plus 30. It's sitting at the 2-meter line. It's normalized, we call it. I can't do anything. I can duplicate it. And that would be very practical to do a custom configuration of, maybe I have a stereo at -45 plus 4, whatever the case is. Let's look at something more maybe specific. Let me push this to a, whatever. Oro 3D. Okay, I picked up that one because whatever. So basically now I'm going to Oro 3D, speaker arrangement, predefined, normalized, but maybe I want to customize it. And customizing it would mean first duplicating it. If you're duplicating it, you call this my Oro 3D. By the way, we have a custom speaker configuration blog that we wrote. We'll be doing probably another specific session for that, just maybe a webinar on it, because there's quite a bit to talk about speaker configuration. But there is a little blog, custom configuration blog. Guys, you can post it on the chat that talks about this. So, my 3D setup, whatever, apply, right? So I basically, just created, you see, it's called my 3D. This is my room now. I'm gonna go back in it, and now you have the ability to do what? To change the position. And as you change them live, you'll see that the speaker moves, right? So you're basically entering either the XYZ coordinate or the AED information on the actual speaker arrangement. I'm going to refrain from talking from the compute functionality today. It is something interesting that we are using in live scenario. We do talk about it in the blog, but this is how you're creating your own system, your own custom application, your custom speaker arrangement by duplicating something that exists, or you just say new, that's my Hugo setup because that's my name, and you go add a speaker or add as many speakers as you want. You just, left and whatever, and you put it to position, and there they are in the space. Just to remember that, and you're not obliged to normalize, but the normalized functionality would be, and I can do it on my 3D that I just created, the normalize will actually gonna bring, everything, basically will bring the furthest away speaker at the 2-meter line. And that is by default your radius on the source, which we've talked about, and that becomes your departure point where the signal starts to drop. That's the concept behind the normalize, really. So you can normalize the speaker arrangement. You could say what normalize can be practical if you've built some automation and now you're doing an automation on a bigger, smaller scale system. If they're all normalized, it's easier to move from one to the other. Okay? If we have questions, I'm going to take questions on the custom speaker arrangement and strategies. Like for example, in the live, we'll talk about this in another webinar. Where in the live, not because there's 2 speakers that are higher, by 1 meter, that it's considered an elevation. You flat those out. You just remove the elevation field to begin with. We often are going to do, you're going to basically often be doing 2D systems in the live anyway. Speaker, on the side, in a rank, in a theater, right? Speakers like, the side boxes, rear boxes, they're elevated, but for the audience, they're not elevated. They represent one plane. It's a 2D plane. Doesn't make sense. The reason you don't want to do 3D when you don't need to, it's because of the triangulation that's going to happen. And if you're moving a source, we've got a triangulation. If you've got an irregular setup, you'll get some misfiring. Confirmed, for sure. So yeah, often we flat out 2D. It's more complex to work in 3D and hard to do in a live environment unless you've got the Satosphere in Montreal, the Berlin Planetarium, or these spheres the Sphere project, we've been hearing about globally about these systems. You know, these live systems that have got, you know, domes where you've got a uniform system around it. Hope it's making sense. We've got some questions. Where are we doing and how are we doing? And we're doing quite good. Yes, we are in a question mode again. Don't forget to like and comment. Yeah, I know that one. Just one question. That would be easy. Yeah. I've got my boss here, my boss in the back. My brother actually is actually in the building. He's been, as we're in confinement, I rarely work at the studio, but he's been coming here on a daily basis, making sure everything's working and figuring out that the ceiling is actually dripping. He can't do anything about it anyway, but he's making sure I'm looking at the camera. And I've got questions coming. You are okay, whatever. Nicolas. You're a machine too. Nicolas saying a machine. Well, maybe it's not Nicolas, maybe it's Jean-Loup. Okay. Ilter, you've mentioned the term AD. Any explanation, comment there? You know, it's a popular subject. Well, I would love to know. I would be tempted to actually start a chat, just a community conversation about the AD conversation. And I'll tell you a little quick story about it. Hopefully you like to hear it. But AD started with my daughter, which actually maybe I wish I actually sent her, hey brother, try to get my sister, send her the live feed. If you can, send her the live feed so you can listen to this. Because she was actually responsible for AD, interestingly enough. We were at home and, you know, she came back from school and said, Daddy, and she know I worked in some immersive things. And she kind of figured out that AD is dimension, it's spatial, Spat. Like she kind of figured that would, you know, interest me. So she came back from school and said, Daddy, like, you know about AD? We're all listening to AD at school. I'm like, what the heck is that? So she started to send me some YouTube feed about AD, and I've obviously put, you know, these headphones on and kind of realized what was going on, that maybe it was an attempt to do binaural audio. I don't know the full story behind it. It's obviously, you know, we're rendering, you know, potentially binaural, you know, that they're doing maybe or not. Maybe there's someone from, you know, from AD here that can talk, that knows about the subject a bit more. But we kind of realized that they were basically, you know, with some sort of an algorithm of processing, moving a stereo mix into this, you know, spatial environment, and there was some localization going on. So it's just funny because that kind of where the AD conversation started. I've got nothing intelligent to say more than, you know, then start to listen to this, and obviously, you know, part of me was like sad to, you know, see some of the destruction happening, and at the other side, I'm like, one thing that I picked up on that I have to admit was, you know, when I listened to a track with a pair of headphones, it was in my living room, and actually, you know, felt the space. It was actually a Latin track that I was listening to, and I really felt like I had no headphone on. I was in a living room with some musicians in some ways, and things were moving around, but there was some static acoustic space that they brought me in. And I'm like, this kind of got me thinking. And it's funny enough, I've asked a question to the team about 2 weeks ago. Have you heard about AD? So yes, I do not know what it is. It is more of a processing strategy to move the source around, but creating AD mean binaural, and all what I showed you today is a way to create spatial content. AD is more, I think, of a, you know, processing. Is anything maybe off topic, but can you show Pro Tools automation, writing, Spat parameters? Alicia. Okay, so yeah, I hope I answered the question about the AD. It's not really an answer, more than my own experience on it. There's definitely some, I think the thing that I get from it is simple. We have, you know, a younger generation, or a generation, not so younger generation, a generation of people that want to be immersed, that are expecting more from audio. And this is great. Audio is picking up on video and lighting departments and shows, right? It's picking up on many, you know, wanting to immerse, to create something, and we're getting the same thing, you know, I think from a population that's, you know, wearing headset, wearing, you know, an earpiece, are always isolated, but we're giving them back something, a space. So although, you know, some can, you know, criticize the rendering, the result, the pure audio engineer, you're listening to what AD is, you'll get offended. It's like, oh, my work for this. But there's definitely an interesting thing to investigate. I think binaural is definitely the answer. You know, better way to choose your binaural is something that, as a subject that I like to talk about right now. You know, maybe finding tools, quick tools for people to pick the best binaural, and then us delivering them some content in binaural audio. Sorry, I made it long. It could be an interesting topic. Sebastian, maybe off topic, but can you show the Pro Tools automation writing Spat parameter? Well, I kind of showed it. Not really. I'm not going to show it. I did show it a bit earlier. I I did show it a bit earlier. I mean, it's as simple as enabling the automation. The second you have Spat Send on the actual track, well, let me just do it. I'll reboot Pro Tools for you. I'll take the other question in the meantime, okay? Alicia, can you provide a link to some templates? Templates of what, Alicia? And I know you, if it's the Alicia that I think, I'm sure it is. I think I saw her pop up. So Alicia, probably from Toronto. Templates on what is the question? We have a new help desk section being developed right now that will provide better access of templates. So hang tight with us. If they're, I mean, specifically to the DAW, we just did some DAW. Yeah, that's the Alicia. Specific to the DAWs, we just released some tutorials, 3 tutorials. We are planning to release those sessions. The specific sessions shown in the Pro Tools Reaper and Pyramix tutorial will be released. I'm assuming the Logic and the Nuendo and others could be released as well. I know our friend Marcel from Steinberg actually has created some Nuendo with mapping to Nuage workstation. We have those templates that exist somewhere. We are planning to put them all together and start to release them soon anyway, okay? So hang tight on templates, but feel free, ask on the chat templates you would love to see, and that'll actually get us to build a list of potential templates, okay? I'm gonna reopen that session, okay? Just quickly, oh, come on. You know what? I think that Pro Tools does not want you to see automation, Sebastian. I'm sorry. We're going to keep this for another time. It's just a license thing giving you a message. We're actually going over the 2 hour, which I hope some people, are keeping online here. If you have to leave, but we're going to be covering a little integration section quickly and take maybe last questions. So let's go back to the other one. But just to kind of answer your question, automation is exactly the same automation as a plugin. And you have in Pro Tools to add the parameters that you want, either all of them or some parameters to the automation, and then they become available. And when you're in write mode, when you're moving things in Spat, it writes to automation. And if you don't want to use that mechanism, you can write the automation, azimuth, elevation, all the parameters. Try it at home if you have a Pro Tools. You'll see it. You can ask support if you need more questions. But we have a little section on that. Okay. Module 4 is basically just me kind of wrapping this up into the fact that, integration of third parties is a long conversation that we're not going to tackle all. And I did cover some of it already in Module 3 to make sure that we were covering all of those. The DAW for playback and automation recording is something that, we've definitely talked about. I'm going to probably try a last attempt at the automation conversation because it's important. And I just don't understand why Pro Tools and the iLock is just being a bummer. Let's see. Maybe we're lucky on this. What we can talk about integration is the plugin. In the case of a live sound world, the integration to Spat is either 2 things. Either a live sound console that can, run a Spat Send plugin, which currently would be, eventually Wave SoundGrid systems with our Wave version that will be coming, but currently is the AAX DSP Venue SXL plugin. And then you've got all the generic OSC from consoles, live sound consoles, that can be used for it. OSC is the key to the integration. It's the, for all your automation, there's, lists and lists of software that exists out there that spits out OSC for remote control. And the other integration part would obviously be the tracking system. You may have seen it before. So let's just jump on the automation, quick dotting. We're going to wrap it up on that. If we can go back, we've talked. If we can go back to the main. Yes, thank you. Try this the last time for my friend Sebastian. Hey, Sebastian. Okay, so that Spat Send plugin here, the mono stereo, where it is, right there, right? This is our Spat Send plugin. Right, and as you maybe know, look at it this way. When you right-click on an actual plugin, you can get the automation dialog going. And you see right now I've added manually only the azimuth, and that's what I recorded earlier. You saw me change the track to right, touch. So as I was moving in Spat, it was recording. I was just playing, I was moving it, and that's it. That's exactly what there is. There's nothing else. For that matter of fact, if you do this, azimuth, and this would be, well, there's nothing recorded now, but I just basically, showed you, well, this is the azimuth, as a matter of fact, okay? This is where you'd be writing your automation. Okay, I just wrote the automation. Is it still live? It's not live, but anyway. Okay, so I think that hopefully made sense. You're writing the same automation. You can write them in Pro Tools. Hope it's answering the question. Let's just move quickly on the slideshow. We're going to wrap this up. Thank you. We spent an extra 15 minutes, I guess. So we started. Just going to wrap this on this. Again, feel free to like. Hopefully you enjoyed this session. It was the first time we did it anyway, meaning that, we've delivered those live. The first time we do it from a studio anyway. Second time. We did it yesterday. So I was hoping to get better today. I don't know if I did get better or not, but whatever. We did. I didn't look at the camera. Did not. Enough. Better? No, it's not better. Yeah. Someone's saying it's better. Whatever. I'll get better looking at the camera. I'll probably just stick a camera on my screen. So yeah, we did look at this. This is the Spat sound running on the live sound console from Avid. I'm just flipping through some switches, and the interesting thing there, it's mapping on the SXL, Avid SXL encoders. The same thing it would be mapping to an S6 Surface in some ways, or basically, any parameter mapping to and we talked about the nuage, for example. So you can be doing some mapping of those parameters. The practical one, the azimuth, the elevation, the one you want to have your ends. When we're dealing with generic, this is the Digico example. We have this template that exists for Digico as well. Sorry for that. We have this template that exists for Digico as well, which is basically using OSC generic, 8 encoders, 8 rotaries that you can send command from a console to an actual Spat. But any console to support OSC would be able to work there. We've got the same integration with the OSC, obviously with QLab. You saw it, these cues. I can actually fire it just to kind of wrap up on the subject of automation in some ways. But, you saw that window. But the more interesting window, I think, to see is the other one. Well, actually, let me just show you that one here, if I can find my... Yeah, thank you. 2D processing movement. Sorry. I'm getting there. Voila. So what's very interesting, is the maps, right? I'm building, let me explode this. This is, thank you. I'm basically, drawing a path in QLab, and that's all OSC 2D, that you can build your automation. Let's move on to the next slides there. Lemur templates is something that will be available in these resources that are coming on down on new help desk. We've got various one. We're on for a recalling snapshot, which is coming with the future version. We've got this multi-touch one here. We're basically prototyping to maybe eventually releasing our own iPad one. But the Lemur is a very powerful OSC and MIDI tool. You can control sources. We've got this this tracking as well possibility with black tracks. We've got some questions. We'll take them by the end. Here, you see the real tracking system from Black Tracks. And basically with Spat, you're basically attaching a tracking device to a source or to a listening head, okay? To head. The actual binaural head could be tracked, moving into the scene, right? So that Black Tracks is one of those tracking systems. There's others out there. Definitely, stage tracking out in Norway, somewhere if my memory is correct. We've got the folks, I remember all they are, but the ZAC tracks. These are all tracking systems based on the OSC command most of the time. Black Tracks uses a specific tracking protocol or called real-time tracking protocol. We can do up to 64 of those. But tracking is an important one for live, for even live broadcast, for that matter of fact. It is our 20 years anniversary, guys. We've been doing this for quite a bit of time. More recently on the Spat Immersive project, but Flux has been dedicated to audio processing for years in the broadcast, to post-production and mastering with some of our our plugin suites products. Feel free to request some trials of all of those. You are now equipped with a 90-day license of Spat. We have a real-time analyzer as well called Pure Analyzer. That's a video that we're planning to do shortly. And we've got the last questions to take. You may need to conclude the stream. Yes. Maybe I need to. And we can subscribe. Questions, maybe last questions on all this before I stand up. No more questions? We're good. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. It was enjoyable for me. To be here, to be talking to you about Spat. Sorry for making it a bit longer. I say a bit, 20-minute longer. It was pretty much the same thing yesterday. I tried to cover as much as possible. Always challenging to do in an intense subject like this. Feel free to ask questions on the chat. Hit us on support. Go explore. plug a source, a microphone, a guitar, mono input in a binaural room, listen, appreciate the source parameters. It's very easy to implement. And binaural does not need, or binaural, say immersive does not need to be complex. You know, I love even to talk about, you know, simple, simple application in live, you know, we just add a pair of speakers in the rear, add a, 4 speakers in the rear of the room to create some space. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed all this. It's been great to be with you. You know, support us, you know, in liking our videos. We want to keep being active. You know, feedback, chat, tell us what you would like to see and hear, and we'll be more active on this, I hope. Anyway, have a great day. Obviously, have a great, I'll call it confinement period, but, you know, a challenging period. We're all, you know, holding tight as an industry. A lot of questioning of what's going to be happening. But you know what? At the end, we'll all be, you know, in this world delivering content, delivering audio immersive content, I hope, but delivering content to get the population to smile and to, you know, to feel, you know, to feel something. So yeah, that's it for me for now, because I can speak for days and hours. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and see you soon on this Flux Immersive channel. Cheers, guys.